Chapter 37. The two of them had given up on any form of movement technique. They were simply exchanging blows with each other in the most violent manner. The essence of the air exhalation technique could almost be completely reflected in his fists. While fighting with air exhalation, Lu Feng could easily understand the true essence of his technique. In the end, after breaking through countless obstacles, Lu Feng unleashed his strongest attack. This attack was practically Lu Feng's strongest attack. Without a doubt, under Lu Feng's strongest attack, air exhalation did not have the slightest ability to resist and was completely blown apart. After completing all this, Lu Feng decisively went offline and once again entered a state of comprehension. 2 matches in 2 days. Exceptional Edge once again killed air exhalation at 79th place, displaying extremely strong combat talent. This time, it could even be mentioned in the Heavenly Network. Those who had previously speculated about Lu Feng's identity were even more certain of their own thoughts. This was because they realized that in today's battle, Lu Feng's explosive punch was a little stronger than yesterday's. No one would believe that in just one day, Lu Feng could achieve such a level of improvement. Perhaps there were people who could achieve such a level, but those people were definitely peerless geniuses who belonged to the entire Federation. On such a small planet, such a person would not appear at all. Therefore, everyone was certain that in the previous battle with Feng Shuiying, he had definitely hidden his strength. Therefore, whether it was in the virtual battle space or on the Sky Network, there was practically a sea of curses about Exceptional Edge. Lu Feng, who was silent in his cultivation, naturally did not know about these things. However, even if he knew, he would not be in the mood to pay attention to it. This was because at this moment Lu Feng was once again at an extremely critical moment. This time, it was not because he could not separate those essences. Instead, in terms of fusion, Lu Feng had entered a clean bottle and a difficult obstacle. After a battle, Lu Feng directly separated 9 types of combat skill essences from air exhalation technique. However, when he fused the 3rd type, which was the 50th type of essence, he encountered a clean bottle. Lu Feng was also aware of this. Although there was only one difference between 49 types and 50 types, it was related to the difference of 1 level. 50 types of combat skills could increase a beginner warrior's strength by 5 times, while 49 types and 40 types could increase a beginner warrior's strength by 4 times. There was still a fundamental difference between the two. Although it was a neck flask, Lu Feng didn't care much about it. This was because he had fused 40 different battle skills and cultivation methods in one go. Of course, that also had an inseparable relationship with his will to fight. Even so, Lu Feng still managed to complete it. After spending nearly 5 hours, his exclusive cultivation technique finally advanced to a higher level, becoming a powerful beginner cultivation technique that could increase one's power by 5 times. This was a powerful breakthrough. Lu Feng felt a temporary invincibility enveloping him. He knew that he had broken another shackle and entered an even more powerful realm. Just like yesterday, there were no changes at night. After cultivating, Lu Feng entered the Sky Network. However, this time, Lu Feng obviously came with a purpose. He directly opened the information section about the virtual battle space. When he saw the information section, Lu Feng smiled. Sure enough, it was as he thought. Most of the information here was about him. However, when he saw the content, Lu Feng's smile turned into a strange one. These news articles were all about the same thing. Their statements were the same as everyone else's. It was certain that Lu Feng was a true powerhouse. He came to the virtual battle space only to satisfy his perverted desire to find the joy of victory from defeating the weak. When he saw this information, Lu Feng didn't feel angry, but worried. He was worried that if he wanted to challenge someone in the future, would there still be people who would accept it? If that was really the case, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to find any opponents in the virtual battle space. With a trace of worry, Lu Feng fell asleep early. The next day, as usual, Lu Feng logged into his virtual account in the virtual battle space. It was just that this time was different from the past because after logging in, Lu Feng found that his mailbox was full of letters. In addition to the expected countless curses, there were also a lot of challenge messages. This confused Lu Feng. He casually opened a message, and this time, Lu Feng was even more surprised. The people who sent the messages weren't ordinary people. They were actually warriors who were ranked in the top 150. Most of the other challenge emails were sent by warriors who were ranked at the top of the list. They didn't blame Lu Feng. Instead, they showed that they were eager to fight. This was truly a little inconceivable. After thinking for a while, he still couldn't figure out why. However, it was good that there were people who wanted to challenge him. At least he didn't have to worry about not having an opponent. After selecting these challengers, Lu Feng finally chose a warrior who was ranked 66. Although he wasn't the highest level among the challengers, this person was obviously more suitable for Lu Feng because he was also a warrior who was good at violent fighting. After clicking the button to accept the challenge, Lu Feng accepted the challenge message directly appeared in the information bar of the entire virtual battle space. It caused a sensation in an instant. Countless people crazily poured into the system-designated viewing platform. At the same time, Lu Feng was also teleported to a new environment. After 10 minutes of waiting, the challenger appeared. His ID was Mountain Breaker, which clashed with Lu Feng's ID, Peerless Edge. However, Lu Feng also knew that this challenger didn't use this ID just for him. After all, this warrior named Mountain Breaker was a well-known figure in the top 100 a few years ago. The preparation time wasn't over yet. Mountain Breaker quietly looked at Lu Feng. After a while, he actually bowed slightly to him. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng was stunned again. He didn't understand and just looked at Mountain Breaker in confusion. What do you mean by this? After bowing respectfully, Mountain Breaker straightened his posture. He looked at Lu Feng with a smile and said respectfully, "This time, thank you for choosing me." "Thank you for your generosity." He frowned slightly. To be honest, Lu Feng wasn't satisfied with Mountain Breaker's answer. He felt a trace of doubt. "I want to know, since the people outside think that I'm strong and only came here to satisfy my perverted desire, then why do you still want to challenge me?" Broken Peak wasn't confused by Lu Feng's question. He seemed to have expected Lu Feng to ask such a question. Seeing that there was still a little time left, Broken Peak continued to explain, "I know your identity is incomparably noble and you are here for some entertainment. But to you, it's entertainment, but to us, it's a rare opportunity. If you directly displayed your overwhelming strength in the previous 2 battles and killed your opponents, then perhaps we wouldn't be so perverted as to seek your torture. But you didn't. We can feel that the 2 warriors you fought with, they gave it their all before they were completely defeated by you. Instead of saying that they were tortured by you, it's better to say that they were receiving your guidance. It's very rare to find someone who can give it their all and is willing to fight with you until the end. For such an opportunity to improve oneself, no one is willing to miss it. So, even if we know that you might be a strong person who comprehended a high-level cultivation technique, we still want to fight with you." He wanted to go all out in this battle to find out where he was lacking. And this is the reason. Hearing this, Lu Feng didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The reason why he allowed them to give it their all was to comprehend the true essence of their cultivation technique, so that he could comprehend more of the essence of their combat techniques and perfect his own cultivation technique. This kind of behavior should be considered as stealing their techniques. But at this moment, Mountain Breaker made it sound so great, this made Lu Feng really didn't know what to say. "Since that's the case, then let's fight. Unleash all your strength, let's fight." The moment he finished speaking, the countdown had already ended. At this moment, Mountain Breaker let go of all his worries and directly raised his aura to the peak, allowing himself to instantly enter the peak of his life at this moment. Looking at this extremely solemn Mountain Breaker, Lu Feng also entered the battle state, but at this moment, he was slightly sighing in his heart. If it was in the outside world, in a real environment, then even 10 of him wouldn't be a match for Mountain Breaker in front of him. But at this moment, in this virtual battle space, he was actually addressed as Sir by this advanced warrior whose true strength and realm far exceeded his own, and even wanted his guidance. Everything was so strange. Lu Feng didn't hesitate and directly punched out. This time, unlike the previous 2 battles, he only revealed the essence of more than 20 combat technique. At this moment, his punch contained the essence of more than 30 combat techniques, because he knew that Mountain Breaker in front of him couldn't be compared to the previous 2 people. In his cultivation technique, there were at least 30 combat techniques contained the essence of more than 30 combat technique. Seeing Lu Feng's punch coming, Mountain Breaker instantly released his tense body and also met with a punch, without any reservation, directly using his most powerful strength. Just like that, 2 pairs of iron fists collided in the void. This time, it directly caused an explosion, shattering countless obstacles, directly creating a deep pit with a diameter of more than 10 meters on the ground. Chapter 38. Everything in the virtual battle space was set according to reality. Every warrior in the virtual space had the standard of a 1-star warrior. To be able to produce such a terrifying destructive force here meant that in the real space, they could erupt with such a terrifying combat power with just a 1-star warrior's strength. Horrifying, incomparable, horrifying. Everyone who was watching felt a tremor that came from the depths of their hearts. Although they all knew that the cultivation technique had a terrifying destructive power in addition to its amplification, when they really saw it, they realized that the destructive power was actually so terrifying. In the modern world, perhaps a 1-star warrior would be able to achieve this level of destruction with an all-out attack. However, that would require them to pour everything they had into attacking the ground with all their might. At this moment, the huge crater on the ground was only the result of the aftermath of the collision between the 2. One was full power, the other was the aftermath. The difference between the 2 was obvious. This was the terror of the cultivation technique's amplification. Battle, continuous battle. The 2 of them were already in a real fight. Although Lu Feng had already suppressed the extent of his cultivation technique, only erupting with an amplification of the same level, his opponent was a true high-rank warrior. The gap between the 2 was originally huge, but the current Lu Feng was not at a disadvantage at all. Faintly, he even began to suppress his opponent's strength. Finally, when the huge collision occurred, the 2 separated and stood on opposite sides of the ground, looking at each other. Looking at Lu Feng's figure that quickly calmed down from his berserk state, a trace of admiration flashed in Peak Breaker's eyes. "You're very strong, really strong. You're only using the same amplification as me, but you're constantly suppressing me. Although the level of my family's cultivation techniques comprehension is not deep, it's still in the primary realm. In the primary realm, I can't even erupt with 4 times the combat power at the peak. But you're using the same amplification to suppress me perfectly, making me unable to resist at all. I'm a high-rank warrior in the real world, then your real realm should be a warrior. Martial artist, what kind of honorable title was that? The existence of a warrior was a terrifying powerhouse who could comprehend martial intent. Their strength could no longer be described with words. Out of thousands of high-ranking warriors, only one martial artist could be born. There was no need to talk about the reverence of martial artists, but at this moment, Peak Breaker said that Lu Feng was a martial artist. This caused the countless spectators to exclaim in surprise. Lu Feng didn't say anything when he heard Break Peak's comment. Warriors. In the future, he would definitely become a martial artist, and being a martial artist was definitely not his end goal. His goal was to break through to the God realm, to reach the peak of the divine martial realm. It was just that being a martial artist was simply a step to surpass. However, that was in the future. At the very least, it would take a long time for Lu Feng to reach that level. The current him was still far from the level of a martial artist. Therefore, Lu Feng's ability to oppress a senior warrior in almost the same realm was not due to any secret method or secret enhancement. Instead, it was him who was truly terrifying. His combat talent was unparalleled. Even before condensing the primordial body and opening the god's domain, he was already extremely powerful. At that time, he wasn't even a beginner warrior. He hadn't received any inheritance or assistance, but he had already begun to condense his own exclusive martial arts. Such a combat talent, even in the entire Federation's trillions of people, belonged to the ranks of the true geniuses. Now, after opening the god's domain, Lu Feng's comprehension and combat talent had reached an unimaginable level. He was confident that in terms of comprehension and fighting talent alone, he would not be inferior to any of the direct descendants of the divine descendant family. With the cultivation of the primordial scripture, his various aspects would inevitably improve and become even more terrifying until the infinite starry sky trembled. Now, perhaps he was still inferior to martial artists of the same realm, to those geniuses in the high-ranking warrior realm, and to those peerless geniuses in the middle-ranking warrior realm. But to ordinary existences, he already had an overwhelming advantage. This was the reason why Lu Feng could completely suppress a senior warrior in almost the same situation. Lu Feng did not say anything, but Peak Breaker seemed to believe that Lu Feng had tacitly agreed. At this moment, he was even more respectful. After a slight bow, he slowly straightened his body. The last attack is the most powerful attack that I am proud of. Although my talent is not strong, due to some special reasons, I have comprehended the true technique of a warrior, the supreme technique. In order to show my respect, I will use a power that exceeds my limit. Please, let me fail with peace of mind. Lu Feng was slightly dazed and then gently nodded. His expression had already turned solemn. Normally, after using a technique, the warrior's strength would be increased by the technique's upper limit. However, some techniques were not like that. Their techniques did not have the slightest enhancement effect. It was said to be a complete set of techniques, but in fact, it was just one move. But it was this move that caused people to tremble in fear. Because this move was the fusion of the warrior's soul and life's strongest killing power. It was the fusion of all their essences, the strongest attack. And this attack instantly erupted with a terrifying battle strength that could often exceed one's own limit, surpassing the limit of the technique's enhancement by a lot. This kind of technique was called the supreme technique. It meant to be supreme, but also had the true essence of being unable to surpass it. Of course, wanting to erupt with the battle strength of the supreme technique was also extremely difficult. It was already very difficult for ordinary people to obtain and comprehend the technique. As for the supreme technique, even if it was only the initial level of the supreme technique, it was still an absolute taboo. It was a treasure that even a small family would do their best to protect. And wanting to comprehend the supreme technique, almost only 1 out of 10,000 people would be able to do so. Moreover, once the supreme technique was used, the consequences would be unbearable. To be able to comprehend the supreme technique, which one of them was not an outstanding person, the only one among thousands of warriors? But to be able to use the supreme technique and still be safe and sound, there was almost no one, because the definition of the supreme technique was to erupt with the strongest power of the physical body and soul until they reached their limit, until they could no longer increase their strength. Looking at this faintly formed, it would definitely be earth-shattering. If it was placed in the real world, it would definitely be able to make the earth tremble. Lu Feng was speechless. He only silently looked at it. Faintly, his hands seemed to be trembling slightly. Even though Lu Feng had already gotten everything he needed so far, Lu Feng didn't want to waste any more time. However, he still wanted to see just how terrifying this most powerful attack was, because he also had his own trump card. He had hidden it for 7 years, the strongest attack that he had never used before. In the next moment, a violent power began to be born, rapidly forming and finally wrapping around his entire body. At this moment, the peak breaker seemed to have turned into a berserk giant, causing people to tremble and submit. What a terrifying power! This attack has already displayed its absolute strength. Did you see the system's display? Countless spectators exclaimed. They looked at the numbers displayed by the system, each of them in disbelief. On the system's display at the side, it clearly showed that the power level of the peak breaker was soaring. In an instant, the 3 stars were no longer a barrier. In the next moment, the 4 stars barrier was shattered. In another instant, the 5 stars became a thing of the past. At the final moment, it shattered, completely shattered. 6 stars. 6 times amplification. The strongest attack of the peak breaker actually reached a 6 times amplification. Could it be that he used some terrifying secret technique to burn his own body? Too terrifying! Too terrifying! If this was in the real world, with the strength of an advanced warrior, wouldn't it mean that his final attack could reach the level of a warrior? Countless spectators were shocked, completely falling into a frenzy. They found it hard to imagine that with only 1 star of strength, he could actually erupt with 6 times the combat strength. This had truly exceeded the limits of their imagination. Looking at the state of the peak breaker, Lu Feng was also filled with pride. He could feel that, if this attack was in the real world, it would definitely be a terrifying killing blow. Of course, the outcome would also be incomparably miserable. The peak breaker might be able to erupt with the physical strength of a warrior, but after this attack, he would most likely suffer unimaginable injuries. This was the terror of a supreme technique, however. In the next moment, as these people continued to exclaim in shock, their mouths completely closed. Because they had seen an inconceivable scene. They had seen a scene that had left them completely dumbfounded. On the system's display, in the column belonging to Lu Feng, there was a clear number. 1010, this was actually a 10 times amplification. At this moment, Lu Feng was in a mysterious state. He could clearly feel that all of his willpower and strength were flowing away, converging towards his fist. At this moment, he felt a kind of power that he had never felt before. Although the power that he could erupt at this moment was far from his peak. But now, Lu Feng had a kind of illusion that surpassed everything. In a trance, he seemed to feel that his soul and physical body had reached the limit of sublimation, as if they were about to erupt with the most terrifying glory of his life. Ever since condensing this fist, Lu Feng had never used it. Even when he was humiliated by Zhao Chang, he still didn't use it, because this attack at that time was far from what the current one could compare to. It had not transformed to the current terrifying extent. Chapter 39. At this moment, when he returned after completing his shocking transformation, his strongest attack had also undergone a transformation. It was also filled with invincible will. You actually comprehended a supreme technique. Mountain Breaker was shocked. He thought that by relying on his supreme technique, he might be able to catch Lu Feng off guard and put him in a disadvantageous position. And this was his glory. After all, in his eyes, Peerless Edge was a true martial artist. However, he hadn't expected that Lu Feng would also be able to comprehend a supreme law. In fact, Lu Feng's supreme law was even stronger than his own. It actually broke through the limit of 10 times and reached such an unbelievable level. This was really heaven-defying, completely heaven-defying and shocking the world. The violent power had already shattered everything, causing people to tremble. It was indescribable. This was the final moment, the final crucial moment to determine the winner. Although everyone already knew the result, at this moment they could still see the appearance of a miracle. After all, in their eyes, Mountain Breaker was a weakling. For him to challenge the level of a martial artist was already an unbelievable thing. A violent roar echoed. In this 99% virtual space, even the production of sound was imitated to the extreme. Countless audiences' ears were ringing, and they couldn't hear any sound at all. Endless dust flew, and all the audience quickly chose the option to increase the transparency. Soon, before the smoke and dust dissipated, they finally saw the final scene. Countless people sighed deeply. They understood that miracles wouldn't appear so easily. In front of such a huge gap, miracles were even harder to appear. Mountain Breaker lost. In the image, he was incomparably miserable. Although his real body wouldn't suffer any injuries in the virtual space, he was still so miserable and miserable. Countless bright red appeared, almost soaking his whole body. His arm had been shattered during the collision and completely disappeared. At this moment there was almost no sign of life in him. In the final moment, he quietly looked at Lu Feng, filled with a feeling of admiration. This was because he had completely understood the gap between him and Lu Feng. The supreme technique I comprehended is called Great Massacre. It's a part of the supreme technique passed down in my family. It's a part of the elementary technique. Originally, my supreme technique was the same as my cultivation technique. They were both at the comet level. Unfortunately, my talent was only at this level. Although he had accidentally comprehended the Great Massacre, the level of comprehension was still too low. At most, I can only unleash 6 times my combat strength. If I can take a step further and comprehend a higher level, then I believe that even though I will still fail, I will still be able to heavily injure you. Can you tell me what your supreme technique is called? Lu Feng was silent. Broken Peak was right. If Kiran could further comprehend the supreme technique, Great Slaughter, then the strike just now could be amplified to 7 or 8 times more violent. At that time, even if he could win, he would still have to pay an unimaginable price. After all, his supreme technique was on the level of a comet. It was a powerful star-grade cultivation technique that surpassed high-grade cultivation techniques. After a long time, Lu Feng slowly sighed and finally spoke. My supreme technique doesn't have a name. It's the same as my cultivation technique. It originated from the same source. Regardless of whether it was the supreme technique or Lu Feng's cultivation technique, they were all created by Lu Feng. Although they were elementary, Lu Feng firmly believed that as long as he was strong enough, he would be able to perfect all the cultivation techniques and turn them into intermediate, advanced, and even comet-level cultivation techniques. The name of my cultivation method is unique. The whole world was in an uproar. Everyone in the Cymbidium who had watched the battle was boiling with excitement. They had already known the existence and definition of the supreme technique through various channels. Everyone found it hard to believe that a supreme technique had appeared in such a battle. It was also because of the existence of the supreme technique that countless people began to pay attention to Lu Feng. However, it was a pity that Lu Feng disappeared after the battle. Many people wanted to contact him but were unable to do so. The entire Cymbidium was in a complete uproar. Even the Heavenly Network was scrambling to report it. This time, it wasn't just the Cymbidium that was affected. Even the surrounding life-bearing planets were the same. After all, 2 supreme techniques had appeared in a battle, and one of them had even reached a terrifying 10-fold increase. This was really shocking and unimaginable. On the second day after the battle, countless people poured into the virtual battle space. For 3 consecutive days, Unique Edge would challenge opponents every morning. On the 4th day, everyone was looking forward to it. After all, even the supreme technique, which could be said to be a forbidden technique in the legends, had appeared. What was there to be dissatisfied about? However, what disappointed them was that Lu Feng didn't appear for the entire second day. There wasn't even any news about him. It was as if he had completely disappeared. This disappointed countless people. The only thing they could do was to continuously replay the video of the battle between Lu Feng and Peak Breaker. Of course, there were also many people who didn't enter the virtual battle space at all on the second day. It wasn't that they didn't care, but they knew that Lu Feng would definitely not appear on the second day. These people were all people who truly knew about the existence of the Supreme Law. They also understood that although it was happening in the virtual battle space, the backlash from using the Supreme Law still existed. It was just that it was slightly worse than the situation in the real world where one was on the brink of death. However, an existence was an existence. It was impossible for it to recover so quickly. These people reckoned that if Lu Feng wanted to recover, it would be impossible for him to do so without a month's time. Therefore, they wisely didn't waste time. It was a pity that these people didn't see Lu Feng's current state. If they did, they would definitely be extremely shocked. This was because after only one day, Lu Feng didn't seem to have any sequelae. At this moment, he was quietly comprehending the essence of the battle technique and continuing to integrate and evolve his own exclusive technique, unique edge. After a long time, his eyes finally opened slowly. At this moment, Lu Feng seemed to be in high spirits. He didn't look like someone who had used the supreme technique at all. Feeling that his technique had further transformed, he had already entered the door of a six-fold amplification and was even close to the threshold of a seven-fold amplification. Lu Feng was very satisfied, very satisfied. It's worthy of being a comet-level technique. It's a star-level technique that surpasses high-level technique. It's only the initial stage of the cultivation amplification, but it contains so much essence. I believe that if the initial stage of this technique passed down in the Peak Breaker family can be cultivated to the extreme, then it can at least increase by 4 times. Unfortunately, this was the extent of his talent. I think that being able to comprehend 3 times is already the limit. It's almost impossible to go any higher. The higher the level of the technique, the stronger the amplification effect at each level. For example, as long as one could comprehend all the initial stages of the cultivation methods of those pinnacle star-level cultivation methods and supreme cultivation methods that surpassed the star-level cultivation methods to the extreme, then one would probably be able to unleash an increase of 8 or even 9 times. Of course, this was under the condition that one could comprehend it. After all, the higher the level of the technique, the harder it was to comprehend. As for the initial stage of the peak star-level technique, it was impossible to completely comprehend it without exceptional talent. Sitting on the bed, after finally completing everything, Lu Feng slowly stood up. Lu Feng also felt that it was inconceivable that his body could recover so quickly. After all, Lu Feng already understood the existence of the supreme technique very well. Although it was only used in the virtual battle space, it wouldn't hurt the physical body at all in the spiritual space. It would only cause an overdraft of the mind and soul. However, the overdraft of the soul was even more difficult to recover. There were people who used it in the battle space before. However, the ending wasn't very good. Even the most relaxed person could only get out of bed after half a year. The most miserable one even directly fell into brain death. But for him, when he just left the virtual space, Lu Feng indeed felt an unprecedented fatigue. However, he understood that with the existence of the God's land and the primordial body, he wouldn't be so miserable. It was very possible to rest in bed for 10 days to half a month. If it wasn't to verify the strongest power of the supreme technique in unique, Lu Feng wouldn't be so stupid to use it. However, what he didn't expect was that just after waking up, Lu Feng found that he had completely recovered. Other than feeling a little tired, he didn't feel any discomfort. This was undoubtedly incredible. However, for such a situation, Lu Feng was endlessly happy. This was because he knew that using the supreme technique in the battle space would only take half a day to recover. Then, in the present world, he was afraid that he wouldn't be as miserable as others. To any warrior, such a situation was absolutely a huge advantage. After all, this meant that Lu Feng could increase his own buffs and enhance his supreme technique's power. After a moment of joy, Lu Feng continued to perfect the technique. This time, it took another day to finally decompose and restore the essence of several combat skills in the true essence of Duan Feng's technique. There was no doubt that it was another fusion. With a few experiences, Lu Feng was able to fuse them much faster. Even if he broke through the limit of six-fold amplification, he didn't waste much time. When everything was completed, it was already the night of the second day after the battle. He opened the separation skylight and stood under the endless starry sky. Lu Feng was peaceful and quiet. He looked up at the endless starry sky and was filled with an unprecedented sense of carefreeness. Chapter 40. The Essence of 73 Types of Combat Skills. My cultivation technique has been perfected to such an extent. Even the elementary part of most star-level cultivation techniques can't have a sevenfold increase. But I've unknowingly completed a magnificent feat. In his eyes there was an unprecedented joy. Lu Feng knew that he had completed a magnificent feat generally. It was very difficult to improve a cultivation technique after it was completed. To be able to increase a cultivation method from 4 times to 7 times in just a few days like Lu Feng did, it would take a lot of effort. This was almost impossible. Even if it was only an elementary cultivation technique that was improved, it would still be the same. However, Lu Feng had completed it. At this moment, he understood even more how terrifying the mysterious Futu in his mind space was. After opening the first level, the primordial scripture and the devil true body appeared, 2 incomparably heaven-defying supreme cultivation technique. Among them, I even completed the condensation of the primordial scripture and the opening of the divine realm. And relying on these, I completed this astonishing feat. I just don't know what else I can get when I enter the second level. It seems that I need to find out more. On the second day, the fanatical atmosphere in the virtual battle space had not subsided at all. Lu Feng also gave up the idea of continuing to challenge. Now, his cultivation technique had integrated the essence of 73 types of combat skills. As long as he gathered 27 types, he could reach 100 types. At that time, as long as he could fuse these 100 types of combat skills into one, he could evolve the perfect martial arts essence, and his exclusive cultivation technique, the Soul Dominator, would also evolve into an intermediate cultivation technique. However, Lu Feng also understood that before he became an intermediate warrior, it was still too difficult to fuse the 100 types of combat skills into martial arts essence. In this way, he didn't know how much time it would take. In addition, it was not suitable for him to enter the virtual battle space now. The supreme cultivation technique that he had used previously had a terrifying tenfold increase. If an ordinary person used such a shocking combat power, even in the virtual battle space, it would be difficult to recover without a few months. If he were to go out now, the shock he would cause would be countless times more terrifying than if he were to use a supreme technique. At that time, those hidden peerless experts would probably come out to find him and obtain this supreme secret technique that could allow him to quickly recover after using a supreme technique. Therefore, even though Lu Feng was eager to perfect the beginner level of zoned only, in the end, he still held it in. To tell you the truth, what exactly is heavenly reaching Futu? Why would it appear in my mind space? Lu Feng was endlessly puzzled by Skirich Futu. Everything was too inconceivable, but in his perception, everything was so natural that he didn't feel the slightest bit abrupt. He didn't have time to think about this before. But now, he had the time. After thinking for a while, Lu Feng finally took out the Sky Network communication device and entered the Sky Network. Now, the entire Sky Network was still in a state of excitement. Countless news and headlines were all revolving around Lu Feng's battle. As for these, Lu Feng only read a few of them with interest and didn't pay attention to them anymore. He had more important things to do now. Following his own thoughts, he began to search for all the information about the pagoda on the Sky Network. The Sky Network was indeed the crystallization of the Alliance's highest technology. Basically, apart from those taboo things, as long as one wanted to find it, one could find it here. And this was the information that Lu Feng needed. Just by saying the words pagoda and futu, countless information appeared in an instant. Among them, there were many introductions. However, Lu Feng didn't feel anything about these. After browsing through countless pictures and information, he still couldn't find anything very late. In the end, Lu Feng could only give up helplessly. Just looking at it won't do anything. It just so happens that there's still half a month before school starts. My physical body has already reached the peak of 9 stars, and I can't make a breakthrough in my cultivation technique. I'll use this time to look at the real thing. I'll treat it as a vacation while I'm at it. Anyway, there was still half a month's time. Lu Feng could also take advantage of this opportunity to relax. Since he had decided, there was no need to think about anything else. However, Lu Feng also hesitated for a long time about his destination. In the end, Lu Feng still chose that planet with life. After making the decision, Lu Feng immediately bought an interstellar flight ticket to that planet. What he had to do now was wait for the arrival of the next day. Time passed very quickly. The next day, Lu Feng got out of bed early. After tidying up everything, he completely locked down the villa. Lu Feng set a time limit of half a month. He would be back in half a month's time. At that time, there would still be a few days before school started. After this period of time, the matter of the virtual battle space should have died down. If he appeared at that time, there shouldn't be much of a problem. At that time, he would use the last few days to fight a few battles and strive to complete the cultivation technique before school started. He would reach 100 types of combat skill essence. After he became an intermediate warrior, unique, could also smoothly evolve into an intermediate cultivation technique. After leaving the villa, Lu Feng drove the flying car all the way to the Interstellar Flight Center. Lu Feng was quite familiar with this place. Before this, every year when his parents came back, they would take him on a trip to various planets. Therefore, Lu Feng had been here more than 10 times. After finding the parking lot and parking his flying car, Lu Feng walked directly to the hall. After waiting for nearly 2 hours and showing various documents, Lu Feng finally boarded the spaceship. He knew that this would be a long trip. Although the space jump technology had been invented, many routes could not be used because of the restrictions of many spacecrafts. Therefore, if he wanted to reach his destination, it would take at least a few days. However, this was already very good. If he only relied on flying, then even if he entered the sublight speed, it was absolutely impossible to reach it without more than 10 years. Lu Feng leaned on the gaseous sofa and closed his eyes slightly. It was absolutely peaceful here. Except for the slight turbulence before entering the space jump, it was extremely calm, just like the ground. And Lu Feng was already very familiar with all this. This time, his destination was Gufang's star. This was an ancient planet discovered by humans 2,000 years ago. There used to be a civilization here, but with the changes of time, that civilization had disappeared. However, they still left a lot of ruins, and the pagoda that Lu Feng wanted to come into contact with was one of the biggest relics of this civilization. Of course, this was not a destination that Lu Feng randomly chose, because when he browsed through the pictures of the pagoda, he saw Gufang's star at a glance. For some reason, Lu Feng always felt that the pagoda of Gufang's star was a little special and a little familiar. As for what was special and familiar about it, he really didn't know. However, it was because of this slight feeling that Lu Feng had made up his mind to head to Gufang Star. The civilization of Gufang Star worshipped pagoda-like buildings crazily. Whether it was the place where they lived or the temple where they sacrificed, all of them were in the shape of a pagoda. According to human research, humans once came to the conclusion that the Gufang Star civilization had once multiplied to the limit, giving birth to countless powerhouses. Among them, there were even legendary divine beings. During that time, their footprints could be found all over the thousands of planets around the Gufang star system. They even left their footprints in many other star systems. This was a terrifying civilization. Perhaps it was not comparable to the current human alliance, but among the billions of races and civilizations in the entire universe, it was definitely among the top. During their peak era, they spread the aura of countless civilizations and established an existence similar to a dynasty. However, later, they seemed to have a war with the peak civilization of another galaxy for some reason. In the end, the entire race disappeared, leaving only those magnificent buildings and immortal civilizations. From Gufang's star, humans found many brilliant relics of civilization. None of these were related to science and technology. Most of them were combat skills and cultivation method. Even among these cultivation methods, they found supreme cultivation methods that surpassed the star level, and the discovery at that time shocked the entire Federation. One must know that the supreme cultivation methods that surpassed the star level were heaven-defying, shocking the entire Federation and making the entire galaxy tremble. And a supreme cultivation method that surpassed the star level could almost create a peak first-class family. The appearance of the supreme cultivation method once caused countless hidden powerhouses in the Federation to appear and fight for it. However, in the end, this cultivation method disappeared. Many people guessed that this cultivation method was finally obtained by the Federation government. However, these were all people's guesses. No one could give an accurate answer. In addition to the supreme cultivation method, several peak star-level cultivation methods were found. These cultivation methods were eventually divided up by countless forces and collected by each of them. In addition to the cultivation methods, many secret alchemy and refining methods were found in Gufang Star. The refining methods of these things had been lost. However, after hundreds of years of research, humans finally used special methods to restore the essence of these methods and developed many warrior and psychic medicine. As for the secret alchemy methods, those were collected by the Federation and created countless new technologies. In the end, they strengthened the technological combat power of humans. Of course, the emergence of these alchemy and alchemy methods made the psychic masters the most proud. For this, they even faintly created a small era. Chapter 41. It could be said that the existence of Gufang Star had saved humanity at least 100 years of development time. Hence, in the galaxy where humans roamed freely, Gufang Star had become one of the more famous planets with life. Compared to the Cymbidium, Gufang Star was not only many times larger, but its population was also far greater than the Cymbidium. Gufang Star's volume was close to 100,000 times that of the Cymbidium. It was one of the largest planets, and its volume was comparable to some small stars. Such a huge planet was enough to attract the surrounding planets to orbit around it, forming a small galaxy. However, there were no satellites around Gufang Star, and even the smallest meteorites were not attracted to it. This phenomenon had been studied by countless scientists of the Federation for a long time, but they were unable to come to a conclusion. Later, with the arrival of an ancient god, the scientists finally stopped their research. However, the Federation had never announced the specific reason. Since then, the Federation had developed Gufang Star vigorously, and even sent a god-level invincible being to be stationed here. Finally, after a few thousand years of development, Gufang Star had finally reached its current scale. Legend has it that Gufang's star was discovered by a human godly king from a distant era. It was also named by the supreme being of the universe. It has to be said, Gufang's star is indeed legendary. Gufang's star has a population of 10 trillion, which is 10,000 times that of the Cymbidium. This number is indeed terrifying. 10 trillion people, this number was enough to shock countless people. This was 10,000 times that of the Cymbidium. The huge population naturally brought about the emergence of all kinds of geniuses. In the past few thousand years, many of the powerful geniuses that emerged in the Federation came from Gufang's star. However, it was a pity that there were no superpowers on this superplanet, which was enough to be ranked in the top 30 of the Federation. Even the powerful families and huge financial groups had no intention of getting involved. It was also because of this that although Gufang's star revered martial arts, it was not as bloody and violent as other famous planets. Because here, the Federation was the most powerful existence, and the law was the supreme scripture. After 2 days of space jumping and 3 days of non-stop flying, Lu Feng finally set foot on Gufang's star after 5 days. In the past, when he came out with his parents, the places he went to were only a few planets in the surrounding galaxies. The furthest place they went was just a few hours of long jump in space and half a day of sailing. This was the first time Lu Feng had traveled for more than 5 days. The moment he stepped out of the ship's door and onto the ground, Lu Feng felt a rare sense of tranquility. Although there was almost no feeling of turbulence during the journey. However, they were in the endless void after all. If they were not careful, they could be destroyed at any time. Lu Feng didn't like this feeling of not having any initiative. It could even be said that he hated it. Therefore, the moment he set foot on Gufang's star, Lu Feng felt a kind of spiritual peace. Lu Feng stretched a little, but in the next moment, he let out a soft cry of surprise. Because he felt a strange feeling. That's not right, Lu Feng frowned slightly. He felt the strangeness around him, and he muttered to himself. Here, why is it like this? After training in the gravity accelerator for a long time, Lu Feng's sense of gravity had reached an extremely sensitive level. Therefore, as soon as he arrived here, he felt the strangeness around him. The gravity here seems a bit wrong. Why is the gravity on such a large planet similar to Cymbidium? Could it be that the Federation has already created a new gravity balancing device? Generally, after a life planet with development value was discovered by humans, it would be completely transformed before immigration. The first step of transformation was to balance the gravity. After all, most people in the Federation were still ordinary people. Even the number of beginner soldiers was only 1% of that of ordinary people. On many huge planets, the gravity was extremely terrifying. It often exceeded the standard gravity by hundreds or even thousands of times. In order to survive in these places, the first thing to do was to change the gravity. Therefore, one of the most advanced human technology, the gravity balancing device, was born. After discovering a habitable planet, the gravity balancing device would be directly placed in the center of the planet's core using a special method. Through the gravity balancing device, it would slowly transform the gravity of the entire planet. This kind of technology was already the Federation's top technology. Although it was terrifying, there was a limit to the number of planets that could be used. Today, among more than 30 superplanets with a human population of more than 10 trillion, only the capital administrative planet and a few well-known special planets could be suitable for human habitation due to their own special characteristics. As for the other planets, they were too large. Even the gravity balancing device couldn't transform them. It could only slightly change the environment. But here, Lu Feng didn't find the existence of an energy shield. But the existence of the entire Gufang planet was comparable to 1/3 the size of the capital administrative planet. The gravity of such a place was almost the same as the standard gravity of the Federation. Could it be that Gufang planet is also a special planet? Before coming here, Lu Feng was only interested in the pagodas on Gufang planet. He didn't have a deep understanding of other things. So he didn't know the reason for all this. Just as Lu Feng was slightly puzzled, a figure sounded in his ear. This Gufang planet is indeed a relatively special planet. Not only is the gravity here suitable for human habitation without modification, but the entire planet also has almost no gravity. This is why such a giant planet comparable to a star doesn't have a single satellite around it. Hearing this, Lu Feng suddenly recalled the strange feeling he had when he was on the spaceship. At that time, overlooking the entire Gufang planet from outer space, although it was gorgeous and magnificent, Lu Feng also felt a sense of confusion. And now, after hearing this voice's reminder, he finally understood. It turned out that the reason for his confusion was because he didn't see the existence of any satellites. Such a huge planet, but there were no satellites around it. This was really a little unbelievable. Then what's the reason? I think the size and mass of Gufang planet is definitely one of the largest planets with life in the Federation. Lu Feng turned around, looked in the direction of the voice, and asked his question. The moment he saw that person, his eyes flickered. Just a moment later, this throbbing was deeply hidden by Lu Feng. The person who spoke was a young existence, and Lu Feng also expected this. After all, the voice just now had already expressed it. When Lu Feng saw him, there was still a trace of shock, because the young man in front of him was really too outstanding. Outstanding, he was outstanding. Although they had never met before, and although they didn't even know each other, the moment he saw him, a word involuntarily appeared in Lu Feng's mind. That word was outstanding. Just looking at the appearance alone, it could almost be said to be impeccable. Lu Feng thought that he was already a handsome man with a graceful demeanor. However, he still felt that he was lacking in comparison. It wasn't a matter of appearance, but a kind of temperament. Of course, he was still a little lacking in terms of appearance. After all, the young man in front of him looked like he was in his 20s. Lu Feng was only 17 years old now. Although he was more mature, he still looked young and inexperienced at first glance. Perhaps after a few years of real maturity, he would be able to possess the demeanor of a young man. However, right now there was no comparison. However, the temperament of the young man was something that Lu Feng admitted that he couldn't compare with. Although he was just standing there, accompanied by an old man, his appearance gave Lu Feng an incomparably noble feeling, as if he was a natural king. At the moment, he was just exiled to the mortal world, but he still couldn't hide the dazzling brilliance that required the worship of countless people. Lu Feng was stunned. The man also noticed this. However, when he saw that Lu Feng had recovered almost instantly, a strange look flashed across the man's eyes, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. This is a mystery. Legend has it that the martial god of the Federation has solved it. However, the real reason has never been announced. If you want to know the reason, then go ask the higher-ups of the Federation personally. They'll know. Hearing this, Lu Feng nodded slightly. He didn't think that the man was trying to deceive him. After all, there was no point in doing so. Thank you very much. After saying this, Lu Feng turned around and was about to leave. He didn't know why, but he didn't like standing in front of this man. It wasn't because of his powerful noble aura, but because he didn't want to. He couldn't explain the reason, but he just didn't want to face him. Although Lu Feng could feel that the man didn't have any malice towards him, this feeling made Lu Feng really uncomfortable, so he turned around and was about to leave. Seeing Lu Feng leave just like that, the man was stunned for the first time. No one had ever completely ignored him like Lu Feng. At this moment, the smile on the corners of his mouth widened again. What an interesting person! Hearing the man's words, the old man who seemed to be his follower revealed a strange expression. He looked at the man and finally opened his mouth to ask. Young master, I rarely hear you say the word interesting. In the past, even if it was them, your evaluation was only average. What's so special about this peak beginner youth, that even you are interested in him? Although he has the dual identity of a beginner psychic and a warrior, in addition to his age, he can be considered a little genius. However, there are quite a few such geniuses in the family. Why are you interested in him? Chapter 42. If Lu Feng were to hear this, he would definitely be shocked. To be able to tell his warrior rank at a glance, and even his identity as a psychic, this old man was definitely not as simple as he looked. One had to know that back then, even the principal, who was a warrior, did not see any problems at all. Legend had it that the principal had already reached the peak of the evolution stage of a warrior. He did not have the slightest feeling towards Lu Feng, but this old man could tell at a glance. One had to admit that this old man was terrifying. Hearing the old man's words, the young man smiled gently. Uncle Ping, you're right. It's just 9 stars of physical strength and a beginner psychic rank. It's really nothing. Perhaps it's already not bad among ordinary people, but in the eyes of existences at my level, such a person is not even qualified to be called a genius. However, just because he is not qualified to be on par with us now doesn't mean that he won't be in the future. Sir, have you already forgotten the cultivation method that I'm cultivating? The young master's words made the old man slightly stunned. Then, for the first time, he looked solemnly in the direction Lu Feng had left. If you say that, could it be that he also has? The young master nodded gently, and a solemn expression appeared on his face for the first time. His bloodline is very terrifying, but I don't know why it's still faintly in a sealed state. However, that seal has already begun to shatter, and I can feel that the seal won't last much longer. As long as there's an opportunity, it can completely shatter and completely release the power of his bloodline. Although I don't know what kind of bloodline it belongs to, I can clearly feel the terror of that bloodline. Moreover, the bloodline revealed in the cracks of his seal made me feel a trace of familiarity. Presumably, I must have seen this kind of bloodline before, and it left a deep impression in my heart. You should know what level of existence a bloodline that I can remember is. These words finally caused the old man's expression to change. He looked in the direction that Lu Feng had left with a look of disbelief. How is this possible? The bloodlines you remember are all at the same level as you, God's descendants. He actually has a bloodline of that level. This is unbelievable. This young master had the bloodline of a god. Although he wasn't the only one in the entire Federation, the number of people with such a bloodline was so small that they couldn't even be counted as a phoenix feather or a Qilin horn. That was truly rare, so rare that it was indescribable. Even if they were to include the geniuses they had hidden, the number would not be too high. But now, on this Gufang star, he actually encountered one so casually. This was truly astonishing. A moment later, the old man seemed to have thought of something. He looked at the young lord and wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't open his mouth. When the young master saw this, he nodded gently. I think he's probably here to answer the summons as well. Perhaps he even wants to enter that place to find the pill that can shatter the bloodline shackles. These words caused the old man's expression to change. At this moment, even though he was in existence of that level, his voice was trembling slightly. You're talking about the bloodline shackles. Could it be that the seal in his body wasn't set up by his family to restrict him, but was he born with it? How is that possible? How can there still be bloodline shackles in this era? At this moment, the young lord's expression was no longer solemn. Instead, it was solemn. This was a stark contrast to his previous gentle attitude. It's the bloodline shackles. Uncle Ping, you don't usually care about these things, so perhaps you don't know, but I can tell you with certainty that there are still a few people in those families who possess the bloodline shackles. Some of them have even consumed the restriction-breaking pill passed down in ancient times and successfully released the power of their bloodline. Just because they haven't appeared doesn't mean they don't exist. I think those existences must be hiding in their families and quietly cultivating, waiting for an opportunity to reveal their fangs and shock the entire Federation. The shock on the old man's face faded, and after a moment, a solemn expression finally appeared on his face. In that case, those existences will be your peerless enemies in the future. Hearing this, the young lord was no longer solemn. Instead, a confident look appeared on his face. In an instant, a terrifying will appeared around him. It was an invincible majesty, the nobility of an emperor. They may become my enemies, but they definitely won't be my peerless enemies. I can do what my ancestor can do. Although they have the bloodline shackles, the power of their bloodline must have reached an unimaginable level. Once they release it, they can almost step into the ranks of the top peerless geniuses in the world. But so what? Even if my bloodline isn't as dense as theirs, don't forget who my ancestor is. How can my ancestor's existence be compared to an ordinary bloodline? After saying this, the young lord walked into the distance. Looking at his departing figure, a smile appeared on the old man's face. He nodded gently. So what if he has a thin bloodline? His greatness is something that no one can compare to. Which venerable in this era can compare to him? I hate the heavens for allowing me to live in the same world as the king. Soon, Lu Feng walked out of the boarding center and strolled on the street. At the moment, he was just walking aimlessly, but his expression was full of contemplation. He was still thinking about the identity of the young man from before. Soon, he stopped walking. At this moment, Lu Feng exhaled deeply. A solemn expression appeared on his face. What a terrifying young man! After cultivating the Origin Sutra and opening up the divine realm, my senses have far surpassed my level, but I still can't sense the presence of that young man. This kind of power is bound to be shocking. Come to think of it, he must be a genius, a true peerless genius. He must be a genius nurtured by one of the super forces in the Federation. I just don't know which force he belongs to. If someone else had figured everything out, they would have laughed it off. After all, the peerless geniuses of the Federation level were too far away from them. Geniuses were divided into city-level geniuses, region-level geniuses, planet-level geniuses, starlight-level geniuses, nebula-level geniuses, and Federation-level geniuses. Geniuses of each level were also divided into ordinary geniuses, super geniuses, and peerless geniuses. After Lu Feng had shown his terrifying potential, he had been recognized as a Starlight-level super genius by the teachers of the Federal University. Although Starlight-level super geniuses were already terrifying, there was still a huge gap between them and Federation-level geniuses. Ordinary people might be like this. However, Lu Feng was different. He had the great devil true body and the Origin Sutra, opened up the divine realm, and condensed the origin body. His future was destined to be extraordinary. His opponents wouldn't be ordinary geniuses either. Perhaps one day, when he ascended, his opponents would be all the super geniuses of the Federation, or even the peerless geniuses. In the future, only they would be his opponents. Today was the first time Lu Feng felt the terror of such geniuses. Although the young man didn't show anything, Lu Feng didn't know why, but he was certain that he was a Federation-level genius. He belonged to the top geniuses of the entire Federation. There was no basis, just a feeling. And this feeling was enough. Compared to those geniuses, I'm still very far away. Moreover, I've already lost too much at the starting point. Therefore, from now on, no matter what I encounter, I can't take a step back. Otherwise, I'll never be able to catch up to them. Since he was here, Lu Feng naturally wanted to take a good look around. After all, Gufang's star was one of the top 30 superplanets in the entire Federation. The population here was as high as tens of trillions. The prosperity here was far from what a third-class planet like Cymbidium could compare to. After thinking everything through, Lu Feng wandered on the main road and looked at the bustling city area. He sighed. Indeed, Gufang's star was too prosperous. Compared to here, Cymbidium is simply a small village. Even the planets I've been to before are far from comparable. After all, the largest life-sustaining planet I've been to is a second-class planet in the Federation. Cymbidium was a third-class planet. It belonged to the lowest class of life-sustaining planets in the Federation. In the Federation, there were 4 types of life-sustaining planet. One type was similar to Cymbidium, which had a population of less than 1 billion and a limited area. This type was a third-class planet. Third-class life-sustaining planets occupied a huge proportion in the Federation. However, the population on them didn't account for much of the total. After all, the population on them was limited. Further up were the larger life-sustaining planets that Lu Feng had been to. Generally, a life-sustaining planet with a population of more than 10 billion was a second-class life-sustaining planet. The area of this type of life-sustaining planet was dozens or even hundreds of times larger than that of an ordinary third-class life-sustaining planet. Only a life-sustaining planet with a population of more than 100 billion and a terrifyingly large area was called a first-class life-sustaining planet. Although the number of such life-sustaining planets was not very large, the population accounted for more than half of the entire Federation. After all, the population on a first-class life-sustaining planet was more than 100 times that of a third-class life-sustaining planet. Many powerful forces and gods' descendant families often owned a first-class life-sustaining planet. This was a symbol of identity and status, a testimony of glory and brilliance. Chapter 43. The life planets at the top of the Federation's hierarchy were the super-life planet. There were only a little over 100 super-life planets in the entire Federation. To become a super-life planet, not only did it have to be large enough, but it also had to have a strict population limit. Unless the population exceeded 1 trillion, and the life planet had to have a god-level powerhouse overseeing it. Only then could it become a super-life planet. Gufang's star, which Lu Feng was standing on, was one of the top life planet. Its population was over 1 trillion, and its area was over 100,000 times that of a third-level life planet like the Cymbidium. In addition to the god-level powerhouse overseeing it, it could be ranked in the top 30 of the entire Federation. Even the foreign races had heard of Gufang's star's existence. Its name was known throughout the entire galaxy. With a top existence and an unparalleled reputation, Gufang's star's prosperity was naturally not something a normal life planet could compare to. Moreover, because there were no major factions here, and because of the Federation's strong control, Gufang's star's stability and prosperity were almost comparable to the top 10 life planets. Lu Feng felt the incomparable prosperity, and his eyes were a little messy. After all, this was the first time he had seen such a huge city, and he could not remain calm. The famous buildings on the Cymbidium were like the most ordinary houses here, and did not attract any attention at all. Any random building here had at least 100 stories. Super buildings with thousands or even thousands of stories were not uncommon here. The streets were extremely wide, and it was hard to find a car that was less than 200,000 on the road or flying in the air. After walking for an hour, Lu Feng saw no less than 100 super luxury cars worth tens of millions. He even saw a famous ICT series super sports car from the Federation. One had to know that the ICT Group was an ancient brand that specialized in the production of suspension cars for over 5,000 years. Even the cheapest suspension car they produced was priced at over 10 million. Luxury sports cars like this were probably worth hundreds of millions, and without a certain status it was impossible to buy one. Super luxury cars like this on the Cymbidium could be counted on one hand. But here, although they could not be seen everywhere, there were definitely a lot of them. Lu Feng couldn't help but sigh at the prosperity of Gufang's star. After walking for a long time, Lu Feng felt hungry. However, after searching for a long time, Lu Feng still couldn't find a suitable hotel. If he was in the Cymbidium, he wouldn't care even if it was the most prosperous central hotel. But here, Lu Feng had no confidence in his heart. Even though his family was rich and could be considered a billionaire, he was still a rich man. However, after coming to Gufang's star, Lu Feng understood that his money was nothing here. Perhaps they could be considered relatively wealthy, but they definitely couldn't be called rich. And those hotels were often measured in units of thousands of floors. The cost of such a luxurious building was definitely not a small sum. He still had more than 4 million on him. Even if it was just a big meal, it would be enough. However, Lu Feng wasn't a luxurious person. He still had a lot of things to do. How could he waste so much money on this? Finally, he saw a hotel called Joy and Lu Feng walked in. Although this hotel was also extremely luxurious, it was better than the central hotel of the Cymbidium. But it was already considered very ordinary here. Walking into the front door of the hotel, someone walked up in an instant. It was a young girl with an exquisite appearance. Looking at the clothes on her body, Lu Feng knew that she was the hotel's waitress. Sure enough, after walking over, she smiled at Lu Feng and said, "Welcome to the Joy Hotel chain." "Hello." Lu Feng nodded his head gently. This was not the first time he had been subjected to such service, so he wasn't uncomfortable with such a scene. "Would you like to eat or stay?" Lu Feng didn't hesitate and replied directly, "Let's eat." The beautiful waitress nodded gently, and then led Lu Feng directly to a room. After entering the room and looking at the luxurious decoration, Lu Feng sighed again. Because he found that many of the decorations in this room were transported from some remote planet. These were all specialties of those planets, and there were no other places at all. Any hotel here could achieve such a level. Gufang's star was really worthy of being the 30th superplanet. The waitress took out the menu and handed it to Lu Feng. Lu Feng took it and opened it to take a look. In fact, before opening it, Lu Feng was also worried. He was afraid that the price of any dish on the menu would be astronomical. But after reading it, the worry in his heart finally disappeared, and it was replaced by a comfortable smile. Lu Feng found that although the price here was considered expensive, it was still within the range of his tolerance. The price here was a lot worse than the central hotel of the Cymbidium. Even if he picked some better dishes, the cost wouldn't be very high. After looking at the menu, Lu Feng hesitated, because he didn't know which of these dishes was better. After understanding that the price here wasn't very high, Lu Feng decided to enjoy the dishes here. He gently closed the menu. He looked at the waitress next to him, thought for a while, and said, "I don't know much about these dishes. Just give me a few of your hotel's specialties." Lu Feng has already seen the entire menu. The most expensive one here is only about 3,000 yuan. With this price, it doesn't matter if he ordered a few dishes. Hearing Lu Feng's words, the waitress smiled and nodded, then turned around and walked out of the room. It has to be said that the high price brings high-end service efficiency. It didn't take more than 10 minutes. A few waiters came in with 7 plates. "Sir, these are our hotel's signature dishes. Because our hotel originated in the Fire Cloud Galaxy in the northern part of the Federation, our dishes are all northern flavors, but I don't know if they are to your taste." After saying this, the waiters politely bowed and left the room. Seeing that there was no one in the room, Lu Feng didn't feel restrained. These days, he was a bit too bored on the spacecraft. The food there was strictly limited. It was almost impossible to have any taste. But now, he could finally have a good meal. Lu Feng obviously wouldn't be polite. 7 dishes, if it was an ordinary person, they wouldn't be able to finish it. But was Lu Feng an ordinary person? For him, there was no problem even if he ate a few more dishes. Not to mention that he was already starving. Therefore, the 7 dishes were quickly devoured by Lu Feng. Touching his slightly bloated belly, Lu Feng leaned back in his chair with satisfaction. After digesting a bit, he pressed a button on the table. Soon, a waitress walked over. "Sir, do you need any other service?" Lu Feng shook his head and said, "No, please pay the bill." Hearing Lu Feng's words, the waitress opened a virtual screen and found Lu Feng's bill. "Sir, it's a total of 3,457 Federation coins." The price of 3,457 wasn't a small amount. On the Cymbidium, this was almost equivalent to the monthly income of an ordinary family member. But for Lu Feng, it really wasn't a lot. He took out the Federation payment card and handed it to the waitress. After swiping it, it was done. "Sir, do you want to stay here? Our hotel has a promotion recently. If you are a warrior, you can have a 20% discount, and if you are a psychic, you can enjoy a 50% discount." In the Federation, warriors and psychics could enjoy special treatment no matter where they were. And on these super life planets, it was even more vivid. Therefore, when Lu Feng heard about such a promotion, he didn't have much doubt other than being a little tempted. "What's the price of your hotel?" On Gufang's star, Lu Feng didn't have any place to stay. He had originally planned to find a decent hotel to stay in. But after seeing the luxury, Lu Feng knew that the price of those hotels wouldn't be low. The price of this hotel chain wasn't too high, it was still within his acceptable range. Coupled with the discounts, Lu Feng was really tempted. Hearing Lu Feng's words, the waitress still had a smile on her face. "Because it's during the event, in addition to the normal discounts, our hotel also provides some free packages. The rooms are divided into 3 classes. The third class is 1,000 Federation coins per day. The second class is 2,000 coins per day. The first class luxury suite is much more expensive. It costs 5,000 coins per day." Hearing this, Lu Feng nodded gently. The price was indeed not expensive. Even on the Cymbidium, it was considered a normal price. Lu Feng knew that although he wouldn't stay here for long, it would at least be a week. Even the price of a luxurious suite was only 35,000 federal dollars for a week. Including his discount as a psychic, it would be less than 20,000 federal dollars a week. 20,000 coins really wasn't a lot. After a while, Lu Feng looked at the waitress and said, "Then give me a luxury suite. Also, I'm a beginner psychic. Beginner psychics should also be able to enjoy a discount." Hearing Lu Feng's words, the waitress nodded quickly. "As long as you're a psychic, even if you're a beginner psychic. Now I'll test your level. After confirming, you can go through the formalities." Chapter 44. After speaking, he took out an instrument and directly scanned Lu Feng in front of him. Lu Feng knew that this was a simplified spiritual power testing instrument. Although the accuracy was not high, it was fast. After just one scan, Lu Feng's spiritual power level was displayed. "Sir, after the test, your spiritual power has indeed reached the standard of 1 solidification. Please follow me to go through the procedures later." After speaking, he took Lu Feng to the front desk of the hotel to go through all the procedures. Then, he took Lu Feng to the luxurious suites on the top floor. After saying his thanks, Lu Feng walked into the room. Looking at the luxurious decorations around him, Lu Feng sighed softly. Luxurious decorations, 5,000 Federation coins a day, it's really not expensive. The decorations here are not worse than home. Lu Feng's home was a villa, and it was a luxurious villa. His parents were very good at enjoying themselves, and their taste was also very high. Lu Feng's villa was personally designed by his parent. He heard from his parents that the cost of building this villa was more than 9 figures. This number was undoubtedly very shocking. After all, Lu Feng's villa was not very large, but the cost was so high, which showed the luxury of their home. Although the layout of this place was still slightly inferior to his home, the difference wasn't that big. Even Lu Feng, who was influenced by his parents, was not very picky about the layout and furnishings here. Lying on the big bed made of dream oak, Lu Feng entered the Sky Channel to read the records about Gufang's star and his destination, then he quickly fell asleep. When he woke up, it was already the next day. Feeling the vitality in his body, Lu Feng smiled with satisfaction. Dream oak is really worthy of its name. Sleeping on it not only allows me to rest faster and better, but it also ensures that I'm full of energy after waking up. It seems that it's necessary to buy a dream oak bed when I go back. With a slight smile, Lu Feng got off the bed and hastily finished the set meal provided, then left the hotel. He planned to stay on Gufang's star for a week. Of course, it was only a week, and he was afraid that he wouldn't even be able to explore 1/1,000,000th of the entire Gufang star. However, this time around, Lu Feng had come with a purpose. The city he chose to go to was not the largest in the entire Gufang star. Although it wasn't the biggest, it was the most famous, because even the entire planet was named after this city. This city was called Gufang City. In the records of the Federation, Gufang City was the birthplace of the Gufang star civilization. Although their civilization had spread throughout the entire Gufang star, and even the surrounding planets and remote star regions had their tyrannical remnants, they were still able to leave behind their tyrannical legacy. However, the true center of the civilization on Gufang planet was in Gufang City. Not far from Gufang City was the destination of Lu Feng's trip. There were no amazing sights there, only monotonous buildings. And these buildings were pagodas. According to legend, this cluster of pagodas was the place of worship for this civilization, and it was also the place where all their secrets were hidden. Most of the ancient books and artifacts discovered by the Federation, as well as the records of the civilization, were obtained from this place. Therefore, one could choose not to go to the bustling cities on Gufang Star, but Gufang City was a must, because from here, one could see the true essence of the Gufang Star civilization. He left the hotel and rented one of the hotel's suspension cars. Lu Feng followed the directions on the map and flew directly toward the cluster of pagodas. He increased the speed to 700, but it still took him more than an hour to finally see the images of the pagodas. And after another half an hour, Lu Feng finally arrived at the edge of the place of worship. Looking at the terrifying pagodas that towered between heaven and earth, as if propping up the endless sky, Lu Feng took a deep breath. Big, it was really too big, too big. Compared to the buildings in the city center that had thousands of floors, these pagodas were much bigger. Tens of thousands of ancient Futu pagodas lay quietly in front of everyone's eyes, unusually peaceful and serene. Looking at these Futu pagodas, Lu Feng finally calmed down and walked slowly. Among them, the smallest Futu pagoda was nearly 1,000 floors tall, and the tallest Futu in the center was probably 100 times taller than normal. Every Futu pagoda occupied an area of tens of square kilometers. The area of the entire place of worship was much larger than that of a medium-sized city. As far as Lu Feng knew, a normal place of worship would not be too big. After all, a place of worship represented dignity and solemnity, and a place that was too big would only add some unnecessary trouble. But this place was completely different. Quietly sizing up the Futu pagodas around him and looking at their shapes, Lu Feng kept shaking his head. This was because until now, he had not seen a single familiar mark on these huge Futu pagodas. Back in his own mind space, Lu Feng did not know how long he had stayed there in order to condense the primitive body and open up the god's domain. During that time, he had been facing sky-piercing Futu day and night. Although he could not say that he remembered everything, he still remembered the general situation clearly. Although the Futu pagodas here were also huge in size, compared to the sky-piercing Futu he had seen in his own mind space, they were still far too inferior. Back then, when the sky-piercing Futu had appeared in front of him, he had felt that it had surpassed the sky-piercing Futu. The sky-piercing Futu was humanity's ultimate technology, which had been directly transformed into a star. The biggest Futu pagoda here was far less than a billionth of the sky-piercing Futu. Looking at the Futu pagodas one after another, Lu Feng did not stop walking. He kept shuttling back and forth. Nothing, nothing, still nothing, not a single one looks like it, not a single one looks like it. He kept shaking his head and sighing. After spending the whole morning, Lu Feng still did not see a single Futu pagoda similar to the sky-piercing Futu. Although he had already thought of this, Lu Feng still felt a little disappointed at the moment. However, this disappointment was quickly hidden by him. Because along the way Lu Feng also noticed, these Futu pagodas that appeared were not exactly the same. Although their shapes were the same, each of them had their own special patterns. Although the overall shape was similar, these patterns clearly differentiated them completely. In the afternoon, Lu Feng was already at full speed. He kept looking at all the Futu pagodas that he passed by, but he was disappointed again and again. Finally, just as he was about to reach the middle, Lu Feng abruptly stopped in his tracks. No, no. Everything is wrong. These patterns seemed to, for a moment, Lu Feng seemed to have thought of something. At this moment, he quickly ran to the front of the nearest Futu pagoda. Looking at the patterns on it, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a strange light. In the next moment, he arrived at another place. In this way, in the next hour, Lu Feng seemed to be crazy, constantly looking at the patterns on these Futu pagodas. Lu Feng's actions attracted the attention of the surrounding tourists, but after seeing Lu Feng's actions, no one said anything. Because at this moment, Lu Feng no longer restrained himself, and all the movements of a peak junior warrior burst out. Most of the people who came here were ordinary people. Seeing a peak junior warrior here a little crazy, they naturally wouldn't provoke him. After all, if they were hurt by such a madman, then the loss would outweigh the gain. For the performance of these people around him, Lu Feng acted as if he didn't see it. At this moment, he had fallen into a state of madness. Because at this moment, he finally found out. These Futu pagodas were not unrelated to the Futu pagodas in his mind space. On the contrary, the relationship between the two was too big. Because the striations on these Buddha's pagoda were actually a part of the Heavenspan pagoda striations. Tongtian Futu was too big. Even though he had stayed there for a long time, Lu Feng had only seen a small part of it. So at the beginning, he didn't think of the connection between the two at all. By the time Lu Feng reached this place, he finally felt a sense of familiarity. And it was this familiarity that made him finally discover the secret of this place. Why is all of this? Could it be that the ancient Fang civilization and Tongtian Futu are really related? But how is this possible? Although the ancient Fang civilization is very scary and has a god of martial arts, they are really too weak compared to Tongtian Futu? Or they have seen Tongtian Futu before, or have a certain connection with Tongtian Futu. What is the truth of all of this? What is it? At this moment, Lu Feng was a little crazy. No one wanted to know the origin of Tongtian Futu more than him. After all, the horror that had surpassed the miracle existed in his mind's space. That kind of thing was definitely not something that any civilization could create now. This was already the most terrifying and great relic that could not be replicated and described. As one of the three peak races in the entire central region of the universe, humans were the peak overlord race in the entire galaxy era. However, the unparalleled interstellar fortress Tianhua created by the human race was far from comparable to Tongtian Futu. In other words, there was no comparison between the two at all. If the human race was like this, it was even more impossible for other civilizations. Chapter 45. Lu Feng could not believe that the Tongtian Futu was created by the ancient civilization, because he knew that there was a huge secret hidden in the Tongtian Futu. Not to mention anything else, just the great demon true body and the primordial scripture, these two heaven-defying supreme techniques, were enough to create an eternal civilization that surpassed the peak. But in the end, the ancient civilization clashed with another powerful civilization and was finally annihilated in the long river of history. If they had the power to create the Tongtian Futu, then in the entire universe, there was probably no race that could compete with them. Therefore, the ancient civilization might only have a certain connection with the Tongtian Futu, but they were definitely not its creator. What is the truth behind all this? At this moment, Lu Feng was really crazy. The ancient civilization had been annihilated. Everything about them was speculated by later human scientists based on those records. And the description of these Futu pagodas was just a kind of complicated pattern, a kind of worship of culture. Other than that, there was no other explanation. The truth about all this had long been completely annihilated in the passage of time. Even the existence of the entire human race could not solve it, so how could Lu Feng know everything? After thinking for a long time, he finally got one question after another. In desperation, Lu Feng could only sigh deeply. The next moment, he no longer paid attention to these Tongtian Futu, but ran quickly toward the largest Futu in the center. Vaguely, Lu Feng had a strange feeling that the Tongtian Futu in the center seemed to be inexplicably involved with all this. The distance between the center and the periphery was already hundreds of kilometers. If it were an ordinary person, they would not be able to finish it in a few days. But Lu Feng was different. He was a peak beginner warrior. With his full strength, his physical strength constantly erupted. It only took Lu Feng 3 hours to reach the center. After passing through the last huge pagoda, Lu Feng finally arrived in front of the terrifying giant Futu pagoda. This place is temporarily sealed off. If you want to come, wait a few days. Just when Lu Feng wanted to get closer to take a closer look, he suddenly heard a voice. The moment he heard this voice, Lu Feng's muscles stiffened slightly. Because Lu Feng found that even after speaking, he still could not sense the source of the voice. This could only mean one thing. That was because the owner of the voice was an expert, a super expert who had surpassed his imagination. If this place is sealed off, why isn't it displayed on the information bulletin board? It was not easy to get here, so how could Lu Feng just leave? If it was an ordinary thing, Lu Feng would give up and wait for a period of time before coming here. But at this moment, his heart was filled with excitement. Because at the instant he arrived here, he finally saw it. He finally saw all the traces on the largest Buddha's pagoda. That was the condensation of all the surrounding images. Although compared to the countless complete images of Tongtian Futu, these images were much worse. But in general, there was a trace of the miniature of Tongtian Futu. Seeing this, Lu Feng had forgotten everything. For him, Tongtian Futu was his foundation, the foundation for him to create miracles, transform his life, and sublimate his glory. Therefore, he was not willing to waste any time, even after an inexplicable powerhouse spoke. He still did not want to waste any time. However, Lu Feng was not stupid. The biggest reason why he dared to face an unknown powerhouse like this was because this was Gufang's star. Gufang's star was not the other chaotic super-life planet. This was one of the heavens for everyone, a place completely controlled by the Federation. Here, the Federation's laws were above everything, and no one dared to break the law here. Legend had it that there was once a powerhouse who had reached the peak of the martial arts world, almost one step away from becoming a god, a super existence who had achieved divine martial arts. Relying on his noble status and unparalleled strength, he once created a bloody case on Gufang's star. If it was on other planets, perhaps this would be the case. After all, the existence of a peak martial artist could no longer be restricted by ordinary technology and weapons. If one wanted to capture such a terrifying powerhouse, perhaps without sending out a fleet of cosmic warships, there was no hope at all. Just when everyone thought that everything was going to end like this, an accident happened. It was rumored that there was a Federation divine martial arts powerhouse on Gufang's star. This had always been a legend, but at that time this legend was confirmed. Because he made a move, no one knew who he was, because all they saw was a huge finger. Just like that, the terrifying finger descended from the sky and destroyed everything in its path. In an instant, the existence of a peak martial artist who thought he was invincible was completely smashed into a bloody mist, flying all over the sky. Since then, no one dared to violate the Federation's laws on Gufang's star. It was precisely because of this that Lu Feng, who was already a little crazy at this moment, actually lost his rationality and dared to directly refute that unknown powerhouse. As if he didn't expect that a mere ant like Lu Feng would dare to refute him like this, the mysterious powerhouse didn't speak immediately. Only after a long time did he slowly say, "This place has already been turned into a forbidden zone by us. If you want to force your way in, I think you won't be able to bear the price. So, leave." Lu Feng was silent because at this moment, he had gradually calmed down. Moreover, from this powerhouse's words, he heard a fact that he didn't want to hear. He said that there was probably more than one powerhouse here. If it was just one, then perhaps because this was Gufang's star, Lu Feng wouldn't be very afraid. But if it was a group, then he really had to think carefully. After a while, Lu Feng let out a long sigh and finally retreated. It was really too irrational to force his way in like this. However, the moment Lu Feng turned to leave, a voice suddenly sounded. "Mr. Hua, let him in. He also has the qualifications to come in." Hearing this voice, Lu Feng's footsteps paused slightly. If it was an ordinary person, they might have already forgotten about it. But Lu Feng still remembered. Because the owner of this voice was too deeply engraved in his memory. He was the person he met in the center of the spaceship previously. That young man, whom Lu Feng recognized as a peerless opponent in the future, belonged to the Federation's top genius. Hearing the young man's words, the mysterious powerhouse seemed to be silent. After a long time, he finally said, "Mr. Luo, it's not that I don't want to give you face. It's just that this person doesn't seem to have anything to do with opening that place. He doesn't even have a guardian by his side. Such a person, does he have the qualifications?" Lu Feng didn't speak. He had no right to speak at this moment. At this moment, whether it was Mr. Luo or the mysterious powerhouse called Mr. Hua, they were far from what he could compete with. And the meaning of their words made Lu Feng feel confused. In response to Mr. Hua's refutation, only laughter was the answer, incomparably indifferent laughter. "Mr. Hua, are you doubting me? If I say he can, he can. Perhaps many people can go against my will, but you, it seems that you don't have the qualifications to do so. Domineering! Such domineering words, such a domineering person." At this moment, Lu Feng could only think of the word, domineering. Lu Feng didn't know how powerful the mysterious powerhouse was, but he had his own calculations. To be able to remain undetected until now, the mysterious powerhouse was definitely a martialist, and not an ordinary martialist. Back then, his principal was also a martialist. It was even rumored that he was at the peak of the evolution stage, but he couldn't feel such a mysterious difference from the principal. Therefore, Lu Feng was certain that this mysterious powerhouse was at least a martialist who had surpassed the evolution stage. He was most likely a fusion stage martialist. But in the face of such a powerful martialist, Mr. Luo was actually so domineering. He gave people a feeling of a terrifying will and majesty that couldn't be violated and resisted. Just as Lu Feng thought that Mr. Hua was going to get angry, an unexpected voice was heard. "Come in." These words made Lu Feng reveal a trace of surprise. He could feel the strong unwillingness and resentment in the tone, but besides these, the biggest thing was a kind of fear, a kind of incomparably strong fear. He was actually afraid of Mr. Luo. Lu Feng continued to remain silent. He didn't move. This was because Lu Feng was hesitating. From the previous conversation, he heard some problems, such as the seal, the lifting of the seal, and so on. Connecting this to his current position, Lu Feng was really conflicted. He could vaguely guess that these people seemed to want to open a place, and this place was very likely to be related to the ancient sacrifice of Gufang's star and the huge Futu pagoda. He was now only a peak beginner martialist. Although he was confident that he could reach the threshold of an advanced martialist and defeat an intermediate martialist with the help of his martial arts buff and combat power, he was still confident. But so what if he was an advanced martialist? In front of these people who had surpassed the beginner evolution stage, he was still an ant. If they wanted to kill him, they didn't even need to move their hands. Just a thought and manifested martial arts could easily kill him thousands of times. Without a doubt, it was very dangerous to enter this place without any confidence. Logically speaking, he should leave. But at this moment, Lu Feng was hesitating, because from the conversation, he also heard a kind of opportunity. Chapter 46. Lu Feng believed that there were many people inside, and some of them were probably real powerhouses. They had joined forces to open the seal here. Lu Feng didn't care about what was inside or what he could get. All he needed was an answer that could answer all the questions in his heart. If he came alone, it would be really difficult to solve anything. If he was with these powerhouses, he might really be able to figure out some of the doubts in his heart. Clenching his teeth, Lu Feng finally dashed into the palace. Gradually, the full appearance of the ancient and huge Futu pagoda began to appear. The surface was densely engraved with various ancient patterns. The walls were made of a material that Lu Feng had never seen before. These walls gave Lu Feng the feeling that they didn't exist. They seemed to be just like rocks, but Lu Feng felt a sense of movement from these so-called rocks, which was something that no other material had. Among the natural patterns on the surface, Lu Feng had seen most of them on the heavenly Futu in his mind space. However, there were also a few that he had never seen before, or that he had seen them but couldn't recall them. However, these didn't matter, because Lu Feng was sure that the biggest Futu pagoda in front of him was definitely related to the heavenly Futu. After all, he had specially checked those patterns before, but he didn't find any such records. Lu Feng speculated that it was very likely that this huge Futu pagoda was built based on the terrifying heavenly Futu in his mind space. His speed continued to increase, and finally, he was about to reach the Futu pagoda. In front of him, in addition to the huge Futu pagoda that was getting clearer and clearer, Lu Feng finally saw some figures. There were hundreds of figures. At this moment, they were standing in front of the Futu pagoda, seemingly looking at something. After running for a few minutes, Lu Feng finally arrived in front of these people. Looking at these figures in front of him, Lu Feng's eyes twitched slightly. Among the hundreds of people in front of him, there were 20 young people. These young people all exuded the same kind of aura. It was a kind of lawless and fearsome majesty. Lu Feng's heart raced. He knew that these were all geniuses, true peerless geniuses. Although they hadn't displayed any power, the feeling they gave Lu Feng was that they were a kind of embryonic overlord existence. There were only a few super geniuses in the entire Federation, but now there were so many of them. No wonder they were so domineering and directly sealed off this place. A super genius represented a huge force. After all, it was impossible to nurture a Federation-level genius without a huge amount of resources. The young genius called young Master Luo, whom Lu Feng had met before, was currently standing quietly among these young geniuses. Although he was just as calm, his existence was like that of an emperor. Billions of living beings looked up to him and worshipped him devoutly. This scene confirmed Lu Feng's guess. Young Master Luo should be a peerless genius of the Federation level. He should be the strongest genius in the entire Federation. Apart from these geniuses, the rest of the people were either old or middle-aged people. They were just as calm, but Lu Feng knew that these people were definitely extremely terrifying powerhouses. Their strength was most likely on par with that mysterious master named Mr. Hua who had spoken earlier. These people should be the so-called protectors of these geniuses. Young Master Luo smiled faintly when he saw Lu Feng's silent expression. Then, he walked forward to everyone's surprise. He looked at Lu Feng and spoke in a friendly manner that no one had ever seen before. "I knew you would come. I just don't know which family you're from. You don't have any protectors." This was young Master Luo's confusion. It was also everyone's confusion. Young Master Luo cultivated the legacy of that peerless existence. He had his peerless bloodline. He could see a lot of things that even pinnacle warriors couldn't see. However, just because he could do it didn't mean that others could do it. He was confused about Lu Feng's identity. After all, the existence of bloodline shackles was the treasure of those bloodline divine descendants. Once they took the limit-breaking pill, they might have a chance to break the seal of the bloodline shackles and soar to the sky. They would become a super genius of the Federation, or even a peerless genius. He sensed Lu Feng's condition and discovered that Lu Feng had already begun to shatter the shackles in his body. Even without the aid of any medicine, it would probably take a few years for him to complete his rebirth. He would walk out of the endless shackles and shock the entire galaxy. Such a genius actually didn't have any protectors. This was unbelievable. Unlike young Master Luo, the others were confused about Lu Feng himself. This was because in their eyes, everything about Lu Feng could be seen clearly. It was impossible to hide even the slightest detail. They couldn't sense any bloodline fluctuation from Lu Feng's body. This proved that Lu Feng couldn't be a divine descendant. Moreover, his strength was too weak. Although a 17-year-old peak beginner warrior and peak beginner psychic was considered a genius among ordinary people. However, in their eyes, such a talent was no different from a mortal. They didn't understand why the famous young Master Luo would ask such a person to participate. Therefore, when they heard young Master Luo speak, everyone's attention shifted to him. As for Lu Feng, he remained silent in the face of young Master Luo's question. He didn't speak. This was because he didn't want to reveal anything. He didn't know why, but when he faced young Master Luo, he always felt uncomfortable. Although he could feel his kindness, Lu Feng didn't know why, but he didn't like his existence. This wasn't a physical rejection, but a kind of annoyance deep in his mind. Looking at Lu Feng's appearance, young Master Luo seemed to have thought of something. He smiled and shook his head gently, then slowly said, "Looks like this time you ran away from your family. Since you don't want to say, then forget it. You can say it when you want to in the future." At this moment, young Master Luo's words shocked everyone. Even the few peerless geniuses who could faintly compete with young Master Luo's aura were the same. Since when was young Master Luo so easy to talk to in their eyes? However, these people quickly recovered. At this moment, there was only calmness and indifference. Although most people were like this, it didn't mean that everyone was like this. After a while, a genius looked at young Master Luo and suddenly revealed a cold smile. "Young Master Luo, previously, we agreed to let him in because you said that he was qualified to enter this place. However, this ordinary person has neither strength nor bloodline. He doesn't even want to reveal his identity." His words weren't complete, but the rest didn't need to be said. This was because everyone understood that the person who spoke wanted young Master Luo to give everyone an explanation. Young Master Luo didn't turn around. He was still smiling at Lu Feng. However, when he heard that provocative voice, a cold glint flashed across his eyes. He reached out and patted Lu Feng's shoulder lightly. This scene surprised many people because the young Master Luo today was really different from his usual self. Looking at Lu Feng, Mr. Luo still had a smile on his face as he spoke. "In a while you will be by my side. Be careful. The people here are much stronger than you." After saying this, young Master Luo glanced sideways at an old man and continued. "Uncle Ping, take care of him when the time comes. Don't let him get hurt." Young Master Luo finally turned around when he saw Lu Feng's slightly stunned expression. He looked at the provocative prodigy and his expression finally changed. At this moment, the gentle smile he had on Lu Feng disappeared. It was replaced by a kind of arrogance and nobility. "Wang Tiangang, you want an explanation, right?" Wang Tiangang was still full of mockery when he heard young Master Luo's words. He didn't say anything and just looked at young Master Luo coldly. Young Master Luo gently shook his head when he saw Wang Tiangang's expression. He spoke again with a cold smile. "It's not impossible for you to explain, however. What right do you have to ask me to explain to you? Domineering, and incomparably domineering." At this moment, Lu Feng was even more aware of young Master Luo's domineering attitude. It was the most arrogant kind of domineering attitude that would never lower its head in front of anyone. Young Master Luo's words finally caused a slight ripple in the expressionless faces of the prodigies. It was a kind of slight fluctuation. However, these colors quickly disappeared without a trace. They didn't say anything. They just looked at Wang Tiangang and young Master Luo quietly. At this moment, Wang Tiangang no longer had that mocking expression on his face. His face was filled with humiliation and resentment. However, these expressions quickly disappeared as well. There is a river in the east, with the word Luo as its head. The Luo produces books, and the river produces pictures. When combined, they are called the Luo River, which symbolizes wisdom and mystery. In the eastern star region of the Federation, the Luo River is the true water of the gods. Countless gods have been nourished and nurtured by it. Young Master Luo, with the name Luo, has dominated the Federation for a long time. Your name has shaken the entire galaxy. Even the exceptional prodigies of the other races have been subdued by you. Legend has it that you have the talent to match up to your ancestor, the greatest existence in human history. Even in this golden era, where kings among gods are destined to be born, you are still dazzling and make people tremble in admiration. You are only 27 years old, but people call you the Luo Emperor. I just don't know if this is true or not. Chapter 47. Lu Feng was silent. However, his eyes flashed with a trace of shock. Even he knew about the existence of the Luo River. The reputation of the Luo River was too legendary, too great. Legend had it that there was a special power in the water. Every once in a while, a special essence would condense. This essence contained a mysterious substance. If an ordinary martial artist at the peak of the martial arts consumed it, there was a high chance that they would break through to become a god among martial artists, a divine martial artist. The Luo River was also known as the water of the gods, the river of the gods. However, Lu Feng did not expect that the Luo in this young Master Luo's name was derived from the Luo River. He was even called the Luo Emperor by others. This form of address was simply too shocking. Young Master Luo smiled slightly. He looked at Wang Tiangshan with a cold gaze, but there was a hint of mockery in his eyes. The current eldest son of the divine descendant family, the super genius of the Federation. Perhaps you're not too bad. However, if you want to challenge me and see my true strength, you're still not qualified. If you want to see me in my strongest state, perhaps your master will have to come in person." When Wang Tianxian heard the word master, his face flushed slightly, but he forcefully suppressed it. "My sworn brother is so peerless, is he someone you can compare to? I really don't know why there are people who place you on the same level as them. You're the strongest among the younger generation, and only the strongest have the right to be called an emperor. I think you're not worthy." Gradually, the conflict began to intensify. Seeing this scene, the geniuses kept retreating. They understood that young Master Luo's faction and Wang Tianxian's faction had been mortal enemies since the generation of their ancestors. The two great families had been at odds for countless years, and even their subordinate factions had been fighting both openly and covertly. Wang Tianxian was the eldest son of the Wang family, and also the number one genius. The Wang family was the number one family under that faction. In that faction, Wang Tianxian was the number two genius, and in everyone's eyes, he was indeed qualified to challenge young Master Luo. The Luo Emperor of the East Water, the Rong Emperor of the West Land, is the battle between the 7 most outstanding peerless geniuses of the Federation's younger generation and 2 of the 7 titled emperors about to begin. Lu Feng stood to the side, watching the geniuses smile and listening to their conversations. This was the first time he had heard of the existence of the 7 emperors, the top geniuses of the Federation. Young Master Luo was still looking at Wang Tiangang with a sneer. At this moment, Wang Tianxian suddenly laughed. He took out a crystal from his clothes and opened it. In an instant, the crystals collided rapidly. In less than a tenth of a second, it had expanded into a towering existence. Looking at the 4-meter-tall object, Lu Feng took a deep breath. His expression was one of disbelief. This thing belonged to someone else, so how could he not recognize it? The towering existence that had appeared was a mecha. It was a mecha that was filled with strange decorations. It was different from the mecha Lu Feng had seen. This mecha was very special. Its entire body was made of an unknown metal, and there were countless glowing patterns on it. Perhaps other people wouldn't know what these patterns represented. However, Lu Feng understood. What shocked him was the existence of these patterns. The patterns on the sky-piercing futu that he had seen in his mind space were trillions of times more complicated than the ones on this mecha. Lu Feng knew that the veined patterns provided a terrifying boost to the mecha, something that made the mecha even more terrifying than it already was. Young Master Luo finally showed a hint of abnormality when he saw this mecha. After sizing it up, he nodded his head gently. "I've long heard that the Wang family's research on mecha has reached the pinnacle of perfection. I didn't expect that you would actually reach this step, merging technology and the crafting techniques of the 4th era into one. Although this kind of unimaginable idea has been proposed and even succeeded a long time ago, it only existed on huge cosmic battleships and interstellar fortresses. However, now I know that you have actually successfully merged these with the mecha. Not bad, really not bad. To be able to reach this step, you would need at least a god-level inscription master to have a chance of succeeding." The 3 consecutive, "not bad" from the proud and honorable young Master Luo was enough to show how extraordinary and terrifying the mecha in front of him was. "No wonder you dared to challenge me. It turns out that you relied on this brand new mecha." Hearing this, Wang Tiantian didn't deny it. He nodded his head gently. His previous expression had already receded. Now there was a kind of fortitude and caution. The Sky War God is the strongest mecha that the Wang family has successfully created after decades of research. Although it is only a mecha, it is impossible to control it without the strength of a spiritual psychic. I'm not afraid to tell you that, under the control of a spiritual psychic, the Sky War God could even completely destroy a sublife-bearing planet. In an instant, Lu Feng sucked in a breath of cold air. Although a sublife-bearing planet was much smaller than a level 3 life-bearing planet, it was still a life-bearing planet after all. Its huge volume was at least 1/10 the size of a cymbidium. Lu Feng believed that a universal-level warship could destroy a sublife-bearing planet. After all, universal-level warships were the most advanced technological essence of the Federation's warships. A warship with such terrifying firepower was enough to be called a firepower monster. Even powerhouses of other races would have a headache if they saw it. Apart from deterrent weapons like interstellar fortresses, universal-level warships were already the pinnacle of human conventional weaponry. But now, a mecha could achieve the terrifying destruction that only universal-level warships could achieve. This was really too terrifying and unimaginable. Hearing this, young Master Luo's expression finally turned serious. Although he was conceited and had exceptional talent and incomparable strength, he wasn't a stupid idiot. To be able to unleash the destructive power of a universal-level warship, it was definitely extremely terrifying power. Even if he was one of the top 7 princes of the younger generation, he had to be careful when facing such a thing. The next moment, Wang Tiantian walked to the side of the mecha and entered it in an instant. At that moment, the patterns on the sky war god started to fill up slowly. There was a dazzling brilliance surging on it. Terrifying, majestic, and indescribable invincible majesty slowly flowed out of the mecha. It was also at this moment that the surrounding geniuses and guardians slowly gathered together with a solemn look on their faces. They also had to be careful in the face of such power. Holy Emperor, although I can't unleash 1/10 of the Sky War God's power and can't achieve the realm of being invincible below the God level, I'm still able to unleash it. But with my power as an advanced psychic, I can already unleash its true destructive power. I want to see if you're qualified to be called one of the 7 princes together with my sworn brother if you lose to me. Finally, it started to move. Lu Feng vaguely felt an apocalyptic power surging. It seemed like it would descend in the next moment and completely destroy everything, turning everything into nothingness. This kind of power was too terrifying and indescribable. In the face of such power, everything that Lu Feng was so proud of turned into a piece of paper. It seemed like it would shatter and disappear with a light touch. There was an endless bitter smile on his face. For the first time, Lu Feng had the urge to regret his choice. He knew that once the two of them started fighting, not to mention the ancient ritual community, even Ancient Square City and the area around Ancient Square City would suffer the most severe destruction. Almost everything within a radius of tens of millions of miles would be completely destroyed. It would become a testimony to their ultimate confrontation. If he had known that such a collision would happen, he really wouldn't have come. Just as he thought that he was going to be completely crushed by this terrifying aura, all the pressure and majesty around him suddenly disappeared without a trace. Lu Feng looked at the old man who appeared beside him with a grateful expression. This old man was the person who Lu Feng had seen beside young Master Luo in the center of the spaceship. He knew that this person should be young Master Luo's protector. He obeyed Master Luo's will and stood guard by Lu Feng's side at this critical moment, preventing Lu Feng from perishing before the battle even began. Lu Feng looked at young Master Luo. He realized that when facing the mecha-shaped cosmic battleship, there was only a hint of caution in the Sky Wargod's eyes. There was no trace of fear. At this moment, Lu Feng finally understood what was going on and was deeply shocked. He knew that even though the Sky War God was so terrifying, he could only make young Master Luo feel a little threatened. Unfortunately, that was all there was to it. It couldn't even give him the slightest bit of pressure. His aura slowly began to rise. In just an instant, young Master Luo's aura actually broke through the obstruction of heaven and earth, causing the entire sky to slowly shatter. Deep cracks began to appear in some places, as if the dome within a radius of over 1,000 miles was slowly shattering like a crystal. Chaotic aura appeared from those shattered areas and poured in. Lu Feng knew that this wasn't some strange phenomenon. It was truly shattering. This was an extreme form of destruction. Young Master Luo's aura actually began to tear space apart. Terrifying. Incomparably terrifying. A man and a mecha looked at each other. Endless power began to bloom, as if everything would be annihilated in the next moment. However, just as everyone was preparing to temporarily retreat, just as everyone thought that the destruction couldn't be stopped, but everything had changed. Chapter 48. Giant Hand. What kind of terrifying giant hand was that? In Lu Feng's eyes, that giant hand was indescribable. In front of it, the sky war god that was previously shining with light was now dull and colorless. That power that could pierce through the sky with just its aura instantly became a thing of the past. With one hand, it covered the sky as if a world had descended, as if it could destroy a civilization and an era. God, descended, God, this was the power of God. Only a god-level existence could have such invincible power and create such a terrifying miracle that could shake the infinite galaxy with just one person's strength. At the moment when the collision was about to happen, God finally appeared. As the giant hand descended, the heavenly war god that was once so proud of being able to slay gods and vanquish demons was crushed to the ground. The complex patterns engraved on his body were dazzling at this moment, completely illuminating the entire sky. Countless powerful and terrifying weapons were all used at this moment. At this moment, Lu Feng finally understood what this mecha-shaped universe-level battleship meant. It meant that it was just a mecha, but the terrifying firepower it produced was comparable to the maximum output of a universe-level battleship. Terrifying. Such a mecha could no longer be described with the word terrifying. Such a powerful force caused the entire Earth to faintly crack. If it was placed in any other place, or under the maximum output of such power, it could really easily destroy a quasi-life-bearing planet. If there were no restrictions, even a third-grade life-bearing planet like Cymbidium could be destroyed, causing it to eventually disintegrate and dissipate into the universe. However, this resistance was ultimately futile. In front of God, any resistance was a joke. If they wanted to punish the gods, they would have to rely on the ultimate deterrence of the interstellar fortresses or another god, compared to Wang Shangtian, who was wearing the Sky War God. Prince Luo, who was respected as one of the 7 strongest emperors of the younger generation, was obviously much more powerful. Facing the pressure of the giant hand, a dazzling light flashed in his eyes. Endless majesty erupted, and behind him, an ancient emperor vaguely appeared. That was a peerless and unique vision, sweeping through everything in the world and reigning supreme in the universe. Lu Feng understood that this was a unique ability that only warriors had, martial path incarnation. Once the martial path incarnation was completed, it would be able to manifest a complete object. And the power of this object was enough to destroy everything. Even an interstellar fortress would have to retreat temporarily when faced with this terrifying martial path incarnation. Looking at the majesty of that invincible king, Lu Feng knew that this emperor-like existence must belong to the most peerless and terrifying extreme divine ability among all the martial path incarnations. Although it wasn't complete, it was just an illusory existence. However, he was displaying the domineering and invincible power of holding up the heavens with one hand and destroying the heavens. Fusing with all of Luo Gongzi's will and power, at this moment, it was raised to the limit. Young Master Luo is going all out. That is his invincible strength, the most powerful supreme technique that allows him to unleash a terrifying increase of 10 times even in the perfect stage, King's Execution. A supreme technique. It could be said to be an existence similar to a forbidden technique. It was a terrifying and supreme technique of slaughter that surpassed any other technique. Moreover, the level of this supreme technique was at least at the pinnacle of the star rank. It might even be a supreme technique that surpassed the star rank. Luo Gongzi's strength was already earth-shattering. Now that it had undergone an increase of at least 10 times, no one could imagine what kind of level it would reach. The invincible incarnation, the great emperor giant figure, seemed to have fused with Luo Gongzi. They turned into one and went against the heavens. They broke through all obstacles and shackles and faced the unparalleled giant palm head-on. The palm attacked the two of them at the same time. In the face of this invincible technique, Wang Tian, who had even used an interstellar-level destructive weapon, didn't have the slightest ability to resist. However, under this palm, Luo Gongzi unleashed an even more terrifying combat power. After an instant, a terrifying collision was heard. The entire world seemed to be shaking. Endless dusk arrived. The surrounding space was filled with the illusion of the end of the world. At this moment, Lu Feng raised his head and looked at the sky. However, the scene that he saw stunned him. Because in his eyes, the sky seemed to no longer exist. The terrifying attack, the invincible killing power, directly annihilated everything. Luo Gongzi's strength wasn't something that ordinary people could imagine. Otherwise, he wouldn't be respected as one of the 7 most talented young emperors of the younger generation. At this moment, after the increase of the supreme law, his strength was truly at the peak of the younger generation. The giant palm from before had completely disappeared. That was a supreme attack that could even kill the sky. Although the giant palm was terrifying, it wasn't the real body of that god. Therefore, Luo Gongzi's shocking attack defeated the god. Heaven and earth were in a state of solemnity. Those arrogant geniuses looked at the sky. Luo Gongzi's clothes were slightly disheveled and his aura was low, but he still persisted in floating in midair and swallowing medicine. Their eyes flashed with a kind of indescribable complexity. There was a kind of vague fear that even they didn't feel. Wang Tian walked out from the Heaven War God. His whole body was exhausted. With the help of the Heaven War God, he wasn't completely destroyed by the giant palm. He only collapsed because of the excessive outburst of spiritual power. At the last critical moment, he also used the supreme law. It was the supreme law that belonged to a psychic master. At the last moment, he reached the level of a psychic master and completely unleashed the full power of the Heaven War God. Even so, even though the power of the Heaven War God was enough to easily crush a sublife planet, it still couldn't resist the will of the god and was instantly suppressed. If it weren't for those mysterious lines and the terrifying materials of the Heaven War God, he would have been completely crushed. He originally thought that since he was so severely injured, Luo Gongzi wouldn't be any better. However, at the very last moment, he saw that shocking and invincible attack. At this moment, he finally understood the meaning of the 7 most powerful young emperors of the younger generation: silence, incomparable silence. Everyone's gaze was fluctuating as they stared at the sky. Although they were shocked by Luo Gongzi's strength, these people understood even more how terrifying the power of a god was. Since his casual attack had been disrupted, he had no choice. Then the owner of the giant palm, the divine martial existence guarding Gufang's star, would also appear. Wang Ju, what a nostalgic name. You are his descendant, right? Hearing the voice in the sky, Luo Gongzi was neither servile nor overbearing. He just nodded lightly. For a long time, there was no sound reverberating. Just when everyone was at a loss, the previous sound rang out in the sky again. It's a pity that your Wang Ju is still not good enough. Compared to the Wang Ju of your elder who used the divine state, you are still far too weak. If anyone else heard this, they would definitely voice out their objection. After all, a supreme technique performed by a divine spirit was naturally many times more powerful than a supreme technique performed by a perfect stage martial artist. However, this time, Luo Gongzi didn't have any strange emotions. Once again, he nodded gently, his expression filled with reverence. The elder you are talking about should be my uncle, the great divine martial expert with the title God Slayer. In my family, there are a few elders who can use the Wang Ju. However, they are only stronger than me in terms of the difference in strength. Only my uncle, who is extremely talented and can make billions of races tremble, can use the Wang Ju, which is the strongest supreme law. He is the only one who can surpass me in terms of comprehension. God Slayer. Yes. Back then, the few of us were the strongest of the younger generation, the young emperor 40 years ago. Unfortunately, from the beginning until now, he has always been the strongest among us, the first emperor of our generation. However, all these years I haven't heard any news about him. Could it be that he has already fallen? In the voice there was a strong sense of longing and regret, and even a little reverence. The voice rang out in the endless space, causing everyone to be affected by his emotions and go deep into an inexplicable memory. Feeling these changes, Lu Feng's expression changed slightly. He knew that this wasn't done intentionally by the divine martial existence, but because he was unknowingly emitting a kind of unconscious feeling that affected him. Divine martial existence, as expected of a supreme being who is titled as a god. Their every word and action can easily affect everyone's emotions. This is just too terrifying. Hearing the divine martial existence's words, Lord Luo's expression finally became somewhat respectful. He thought that he had already guessed the identity of the person opposite him. You must be the ancient orchid god. Your existence, when I was very young, I once heard the elders of my family mention your existence. I didn't expect the guardian of Gufang's star to be you. My uncle left the family for some reason when I was young. He didn't fall, and has been living well all this time. Thank you for your concern. Another period of silence. It was uncomfortable, oppressive, and endless fear. Finally, the voice rang out again. Once, the 5 of us were ranked as the strongest in the Federation. Even among the thousands of races in the galaxy, we were considered to be the pinnacle of geniuses. However, he was undeniably the strongest emperor. Now, after all these years of settling down, we have all found our own direction and are gradually opening up our path. I can feel that my Tao is gradually appearing. Go back and tell him that when I complete my Tao of origin, it will be the time for me to challenge him. I hope that when the time comes, he won't disappoint me. Chapter 49. After saying that, the owner of the voice left. Although no one could see anything, they could feel that the owner of the voice, the noble and supreme god, had really left. Everyone was extremely silent. These people dared to cause such a big commotion here because they had nothing to fear. Not to mention anything else, just the power behind young Master Luo was incomparably terrifying. It was one of the most powerful forces in the entire Federation. In their own galaxy they had established their own country. Even the Federation government didn't dare to do anything to them. Although the Federation had a god, young Master Luo's family also had a god. In fact, they had quite a few gods, and it was very likely that they had already become true gods. Therefore, as long as they didn't go too far and didn't commit a heinous crime, the Federation government didn't want to be too strict with the descendants of these terrifying forces. The giant hand just now was already considered his punishment. These people also understood that the god just wanted to punish them. He didn't intend to kill anyone. If he really wanted to kill these people, the attack just now would have been made by the god himself. At that time, unless it was another god, no one would be able to escape. The scene of destruction in the sky was quickly restored. This was all thanks to the god. At the divine martial realm, one could already carry out the evolution of the world. With a wave of their hands they had the power of creation. Wherever their thoughts went, everything would tremble in submission. They could create living beings. Therefore, although the divine martial realm still had the title of martial realm, when people called them divine martial realm, they would habitually remove the mortal title and directly call them gods. The damage on the ground was also slowly healing. Lu Feng could feel an indescribable power slowly repairing the ground. At this moment, he was even more curious and mysterious about the ancient Fang civilization's place of worship. Young Master Luo slowly descended from the sky. His face was pale. Lu Feng knew that this was the aftereffect of using the supreme law. It was already inconceivable that he could still be in such a state after using the perfect supreme law. This made Lu Feng feel admiration. In an instant, Uncle Ping, who was beside Lu Feng, disappeared. He appeared beside young Master Luo and supported him. Out of nowhere, he took out a bottle of crystal-clear medicine and fed it to young Master Luo. "Young Master, why are you risking your life? He must know who you are. Even if you just stand here and do nothing, he won't be able to do anything to you." Uncle Ping looked at young Master Luo with heartache and sighed slightly. Hearing this, Child Luo smiled. Although his pale complexion didn't fade, although he still had a pained expression on his face, however, his arrogance could not be concealed. "I am the king's bloodline. No matter what I face, the king's glory will never be lost. Even if I know that there is an insurmountable gap in front of me, I will still, not taking a step back." Everyone was silent. The Holy Emperor was one of the 7 most powerful emperors of the younger generation. However, among the 7 young emperors, his bloodline density was not the highest. However, his strength was enough to be ranked among the strongest. Among the 7 emperors, only he and Emperor Rong had clashed before. However, 4 of the remaining 5 emperors had clearly admitted that they were inferior to the Holy Emperor and Emperor Rong. The remaining, the most mysterious demon emperor, had also said that he could not suppress them. This was enough. This was enough to prove the Holy Emperor's strength. The reason why he could be so outstanding in this era of the Human Federation was not only because of his peerless talent, but also because of the strength of his bloodline. They were all the most powerful descendants of gods, but the density of his bloodline could not be compared to the other emperors. Compared to Emperor Rong, it was even worse. However, the existence of his bloodline was incomparable to the others. This was because he had inherited the legacy of the greatest king. Time passed slowly. Young Master Luo was recovering continuously. However, even Lu Feng could tell that he would not be able to recover completely in such a short time. Soon, countless mechanical roars could be heard from the distant horizon. An endless number of spaceships and mechas rushed towards them from the sky. In an instant, they occupied all the positions in the sky. Lu Feng was speechless when he saw these people. These people were the Federation's army. They were even a regular army that could fight across galaxies. Although not all of them had appeared, not even 1% of them had appeared. However, the appearance of such an organization in a region was still very shocking. Lu Feng looked at the surrounding Federation geniuses, who were extremely silent. However, they were not afraid at all. They just quietly watched this military organization that could easily destroy a level 3 life planet. After a long time, a huge battleship over 10 kilometers long flew out from the army. This was a quasi-advanced battleship. It was at the center of everything. Soon, the battleship's main door opened. A person wearing the uniform of a first-rank officer walked out. He looked at the hundreds of people standing quietly below him and finally sighed deeply. He said slowly, "I know that all of you are the inheritors of powerful forces in the Federation. However, please take note that this is Gufang Planet, a restricted area for the various large organizations of the Federation. If you act too presumptuously, then we will no longer care about the organizations behind you and forcefully take action." If an ordinary person heard this, they would be frightened. However, none of the people present were ordinary. The forces behind them were at least at the level of a galaxy. In the eyes of ordinary people, such an army might be a towering existence that they would never dare to offend. However, to them it was really nothing. In their eyes, if it was the general army of the Federation group that shook the entire galaxy, they might be afraid. However, these were inferior existences to them. They were really nothing. Of course, even if they thought so, these people would not say it out loud. After all, the one standing on Gufang planet was a god. The Gulan god whose name had spread through the galaxy decades ago. These people were not Luo Gongzi, who dared to go against a god. We understand. Just now we were impulsive and disturbed everyone. In the end, it was Luo Gongzi who spoke. At this moment, after he used a supreme method and displayed his shocking strength, no one dared to provoke him. Even Wang Tiantian, who got up with difficulty and was protected by several guardians, didn't have any temper. Hearing this, the first-rank general nodded gently. After trying to show a smile, he finally turned around and walked into the battleship. A few moments later, the terrifying fleet disappeared as quickly as it came. The Gulan god appeared just now. Isn't it unnecessary for them to come? Seeing the disappearing figure, a genius finally couldn't help but speak. However, no one responded to his words. Because these people weren't idiot. After thinking for a while, they already understood the key point. Although the Gulan god appeared. However, he only represented himself. He was just a guardian, not a representative of the Federation's law. Only these people were. Therefore, after he appeared, these people still braced themselves and came. After all, they were the Federation's army stationed here. When encountering such a situation, they had to show up and express their gratitude. Soon, these people's eyes focused on Luo Gongzi, whose complexion had recovered a little. They didn't say anything. However, even Lu Feng knew what they meant. Seeing these people's gazes, Luo Gongzi smiled gently. He looked at the terrifying tall Futu pagoda and his expression began to become more dignified. This time, so many geniuses from the Federation have gathered here. Their purpose must be clear. Our elders have been here countless times before, but they never managed to open the door in front of us. This time, we're going to try. We're going to try something that our ancestors couldn't do. The Su family's young master obtained an ancient artifact from an ancient ruin, and this artifact seems to have an inexplicable connection with the ancient Fang clan. After deciphering it, we found that with it, we might be able to open the door of the central sacrificial ground and enter here. Everyone was aware of this. After all, before they came here, they had already received the news. However, before entering here, we have to destroy the seal set by that existence. However, it was very difficult to destroy such a seal with pure strength alone. This seal was a supreme seal set up by the person who had discovered this place and answered many of the questions in this place. To break the seal, we have to have a bloodline. Only the bloodline power of us, the descendants of the gods, can break his seal. Other than that, there's no other way. Endless silence. All the geniuses looked at Luo Gongzi. This was because they knew that if they wanted to break the seal, they had to follow Luo Gongzi's lead. After all, the seal set by that existence could only be broken by an even stronger bloodline power. Although everyone present was a divine descendant, the level of their bloodline power was slightly lower. Only Luo Gongzi's bloodline had such power. Since none of you have any objections, let's begin. After saying this, Luo Gongzi looked at Uncle Ping next to him, then at the guardians behind the geniuses. Finally, he nodded lightly. Guardians, I'll have to trouble you with the outer seal. Hearing this, the guardians didn't say anything. All of them took a step forward and arrived at the foot of the huge ancient Buddha pagoda. Chapter 50. The next moment, countless forces surged. Nearly half of the Guardians summoned their own personal mechas or small battleship. At this moment, whether it was the battleships, mechas, or the terrifying martial artists, they all went all out. The huge power instantly broke through the clouds, causing the entire earth to tremble. Lu Feng narrowed his eyes slightly. At this moment, his heart was constantly shaken. When he was in the Cymbidium, the strongest person Lu Feng saw was their school's principal, the legendary martial artist who was already at the peak of the evolution period. However, he now realized that a martial artist in the evolution period was really nothing. This was because none of the guardians or geniuses that appeared so far were lower than the evolution period. At the very least, they were super strong in the upheaval period or ability users at the same level as psychics, close to 100 upheaval or even perfect stage martial artists and psychics attacked at the same time. Such a terrifying power was definitely enough to shake the world, causing all the brilliance to be overshadowed. Gradually, all the forces were boiling. Under Lu Feng's horrified gaze, all the forces actually condensed at one point and suddenly rushed toward the huge Futu Pagoda in the center. The full-force attack of a martial artist in the upheaval period was definitely earth-shattering. Although the Futu Pagoda in front of him was huge, it was not enough in the face of the full-force attack of a martial artist in the upheaval period. Perhaps even a city would be crushed and turned into nothingness under the attack of such a strong person. At this moment, it was the strongest killing move of nearly 100 of these terrifying strong people. Lu Feng believed that with such a condensed attack, perhaps even a level 3 life planet would become a thing of the past. In the next moment, the earth-shattering scene that Lu Feng expected did not appear. In this endless violent turbulence of destruction, the huge Futu Pagoda seemed to be the only eternity between heaven and earth. Layers of ripples surged, but the Futu Pagoda did not suffer any damage. Finally, when the most powerful force was released, the ripples were like a mirror shattering into pieces. At this moment, the powerful martial artists and psychics stopped what they were doing. The mechas disappeared, the battleships disappeared, and everyone calmly appeared in front of everyone. They nodded lightly at their respective young masters and Luo Gongzi. Luo Gongzi smiled slightly and walked to the front. Looking at the Futu Pagoda that seemed to have lost its protective power, there was a faint trace of excitement in his expression. If a god were to make a move, I'm afraid it would only take a light blow to completely destroy the outer protective power. Unfortunately, we can't ask the god in our family to make a move here. But it's okay now. The little protective forces deployed by the federal government have already disappeared. What's left is ours. After saying that, Luo Gongzi's face finally, Luo Gongzi. Activate your bloodline power, open the seal, Luo Gongzi. Out Luo Gongzi, Luo Gongzi, Gongzi, Luo Gongzi, Gongzi, Luo Gongzi. Luo Gongzi, Luo Gongzi Z, Luo Gongzi. You should be aware of the things that might be inside. Ever since this civilization was discovered, there have only been 3 people who have truly entered it. Those 3 people's identities are the noblest in the entire universe. Perhaps they don't care about those things, but they're incomparably precious to us. Therefore, whether we can obtain an opportunity or not depends on this. Luo Gongzi raised his arm slightly. At this moment, the 20 young geniuses behind him did the same. They all had solemn expressions as if they were undergoing some kind of solemn ceremony. As Lu Feng watched everything unfold, he was filled with endless doubts. Luo Gongzi raised his arm and walked to Lu Feng's side. He said softly, I'll now impart the bloodline activation method to you. Although your bloodline is still sealed, it's still possible to activate some of your bloodline power. When the time comes, attack together with us and destroy a hole in the seal. If you can open it and enter, I promise that you'll have a share of the things inside. After he finished speaking, an inexplicable will appeared. It was projected directly into Lu Feng's mind when he was unprepared. Lu Feng didn't react, or perhaps he didn't even have time to react when a strange cultivation method appeared in his mind. He knew that this was the bloodline activation method that Luo Gongzi was talking about. This kind of cultivation method was just a method of triggering. It wasn't really that profound. With Lu Feng's talent, he understood it in a few moments. The next moment, he raised his arms and closed his eyes. Luo Gongzi's eyes flashed when he saw this. He knew that those who were able to possess bloodline shackles were all geniuses. Even if their bloodline hadn't awakened, the peerless talent that was bestowed by their bloodline wouldn't be destroyed. However, this talent wasn't completely unleashed. The amazement they possessed was at most among ordinary people. However, this young man in front of him actually comprehended the bloodline activation method in an instant. This was truly shocking. One had to know that even Luo Gongzi had only used a little bit of time back then. At that time, he had already awakened his own bloodline. It's hard to imagine. He was already so stunning before the bloodline shackles were shattered. Once he fully awakens, how terrifying will he be? I'm afraid that there will be an 8th emperor among the 7 emperors. After muttering to himself in a low voice, Luo Gongzi finally immersed all of his willpower into activating his bloodline. Soon, all sorts of mysteries and willpower appeared. They condensed on the arms of these geniuses. It was formless and formless, but it was always there. It was real. However, the mysteries that they activated weren't exactly the same. The main difference between them was the magnitude of their power and majesty. Luo Gongzi's bloodline power wasn't the densest among everyone present, but it was the most majestic. The majesty of an invincible king overlooking everything made the bloodline power condensed by those existences feel like they were retreating. Looking at this, the guardians nodded slightly. As expected of his descendant. Even though his bloodline power isn't very dense, his majesty and realm far surpass any other existence. Hateful heaven gave us the emperor's order to live in the same world as the emperor. Since ancient times, among the billions of races, the greatest emperor. How terrifying! All eyes were focused on Luo Gongzi's palm. At this moment, even their young master couldn't attract the attention of these peerless powerhouses. Regardless of whether it was a psychic or a warrior, they were all paying close attention to the bloodline power condensing of the ancient first emperor. No. How is that possible? Look. Just as everyone was paying attention, a psychic's expression suddenly changed. He stretched out his finger and pointed in a direction. His face was filled with disbelief. Many of the guardians were awakened. They all looked in the direction that the psychic pointed at. However, after a glance, they all had the same expression. What kind of bloodline does he have? Why can't I feel the power of this bloodline? How domineering! Even under the pressure of Luo Gongzi's bloodline, he didn't show the slightest bit of fear. He even gave me the feeling that he's on an extremely noble level, not inferior to Luo Gongzi in the slightest. The guardians were looking in the direction that Lu Feng was standing at the back, trying to condense his bloodline power. At this moment, Lu Feng was already immersed in his own mind. Endless waves of energy were constantly emitted as his body and mind settled down. This was a power that surpassed any imagination. It was emitted from Lu Feng's body, but it was as if the bloodline power of heaven and earth was being displayed together. In the beginning, although he had followed the cultivation method to activate the bloodline power in his body, he still hadn't succeeded after trying for a long time. Lu Feng knew that he did have the power of a bloodline, and his bloodline should be very noble. Otherwise, the so-called relatives and fathers he had met back then wouldn't have said such things. However, after trying for a long time, he still didn't feel anything. Just as he thought that his bloodline was extremely thin and that he couldn't activate it and was about to give up, Lu Feng suddenly felt a strange sensation. It was born from his own blood and existed in every corner of his body. They existed and struggled incomparably, as if they were trying to break through the obstacles of some region and appear in his body. However, at the moment when the breakthrough was at its strongest, another kind of inexplicable shackle appeared. It was powerful, terrifying, and indescribable. Lu Feng didn't know why there were such shackles in his body. He didn't understand how they came about. These shackles seemed to have been there since he was born, as if they had always been there and sealed his bloodline. The power of a bloodline was terrifying, truly incomparably terrifying. Although he only felt it for a moment, Lu Feng could clearly feel that it was an incomparably terrifying and powerful bloodline. It was an invincible bloodline that, once it appeared, would make time pale in comparison and make heaven and earth tremble. However, even with such a terrifying and peerless bloodline, it still couldn't break through the final obstacle. However, although he couldn't break through the shackles, Lu Feng still felt a trace of power flowing out. He felt that there seemed to be a small gap in the seal. And it was through this small gap that some of the power from his sealed bloodline slowly appeared and began to gather in his hand. Chapter 51. Everyone looked at Lu Feng. They finally understood why Luo Gongzi let Lu Feng in. That's a sealed bloodline. The aura seeping out from the seal is simply impossible to sense which bloodline's power belongs to. But there's one thing we can be sure of. This bloodline is extremely terrifying. It should be one of the most powerful bloodlines below the king bloodline. This is a genius, a terrifying genius. His bloodline is sealed because his bloodline is too strong. It was sealed by the elders of his family so that he can safely grow until he can bear the power of the bloodline. Once he releases all of his bloodline, I'm afraid there will be another super genius in the Federation. Finally, at the last moment, Lu Feng released all of his bloodline. An extremely illusory power condensed in his palm. That was the fusion power of his bloodline. This illusory color was obviously much weaker than the others. But no one underestimated him because this was the bloodline power condensed through a crack in the seal. Everyone opened their eyes and looked at Lu Feng with slight surprise. At this moment, these geniuses also understood Luo Gongzi's plan. They all looked at Luo Gongzi at the same time. Luo Gongzi didn't care about these people's gazes. He didn't care at all, because at this moment, his gaze was also focused on Lu Feng. No one saw Luo Gongzi's slightly trembling mouth and his unusually deep and excited gaze. How is this possible? Although it was only a trace of bloodline power, he could still feel it. Suppressing the excitement in his heart, Luo Gongzi looked at Lu Feng with a strange gaze. But soon, this trace of emotion was deeply hidden by him. He regained his original expression. He looked at the terrifyingly huge Futu pagoda again. I don't need to say anything else. You should know the rest. Inject your bloodline power into it and temporarily open a trace of the seal. We'll use this time to use the ancient artifact to try to open the ancient Fang clan's sacrificial ground. Let's attack together. In the next moment, Mr. Luo walked to the front and placed his bloodline-powered arm on the Futu pagoda. Soon after, the other geniuses did the same. Similarly, he placed his arm on the pagoda. Seeing these people's actions, Lu Feng didn't hesitate and did the same. In an instant, it was really just an instant, Lu Feng felt that he had entered a completely new zone. There was endless darkness there. There was no sky, no earth. There was only endless darkness and darkness. However, after suddenly appearing in such a strange space, Lu Feng wasn't shocked at all. This was because there were more than 20 figures beside him. They were those geniuses. Young Master Luo stood in front of everyone with a serious look in his eyes. In a moment, the seal set up by that existence will appear. We don't have the slightest ability to resist him. Fortunately, we have the bloodline. Use our bloodline to restrain him temporarily. The guardians outside will try their best to break a layer of the seal so that we can temporarily open this place. In a moment, don't make a move. Use your bloodline power to resist the surge of the seal's power. Do you understand? These geniuses had either heard of the method to break the seal, or they had known about it for a long time. They nodded their heads lightly. Young Master Luo didn't intend to tell them. At the moment, he was only paying attention to Lu Feng. Remember, if you can't resist it, come to my side. However, if you force yourself too much, your bloodline power won't be fully released. You can't withstand too much right now. For some reason, Lu Feng felt that young Master Luo's tone had changed a lot compared to before. However, Lu Feng couldn't tell what kind of change it was. He was sure that young Master Luo didn't have any ill intentions towards him back then. At the moment, there seemed to be a sense of closeness to him. Lu Feng did not try to be brave. The virtual version of him nodded gently. All right, it's coming out. Everyone became extremely cautious when they heard young Master Luo's words. At that moment, in a distant location, the endless chaotic and dark space seemed to be torn apart by a powerful force. A crack opened with a loud bang. An ancient, desolate, and invincible aura slowly emerged from the crack. In an instant, another instant, the crack was completely torn to its greatest extent. At the next moment, its body finally descended into the pitch-black space that is. At this moment, Lu Feng's eyes were as wide as they could be. He stared at the thing in front of him in disbelief. How could it be him? Could it be that the existence that sealed this place back then was him? Lu Feng looked at the solemn faces of the people in front of him, unable to believe what he was seeing. However, those geniuses seemed to have known all along. They didn't look shocked at all. They just quietly stared at the terrifying object in front of them that covered the sky. Lu Feng took a deep breath. He wanted to calm down, but he realized that it was all in vain. That was because the thing in front of him was too terrifying. He couldn't believe it. I really didn't expect that the existence that sealed this place was actually that existence. In front of him, the gigantic object was incomparably close. As far as the eye could see, there were countless blood-red images. Those images had all sorts of appearances. However, they all had one thing in common. That was because these images were all images of living beings. Thousands of images of all sorts of living beings were deeply engraved on that gigantic object. And that object was a tombstone of unknown terrifying size. Almost everyone in the Federation knew about the existence of this tombstone. That was because in the history of the Federation that they were familiar with, the significance of this tombstone was incomparably shocking. It belonged to one of the top beliefs of the Federation. Its name was the Yellow Spring Tombstone. This wasn't a strange existence that was born and nurtured by the heavens and earth, nor was it the crystallization of the Federation's technology, nor was it a relic from a distant era. It was the martial arts incarnation of a great existence. It was the condensation of his martial arts will. That existence's name was the Divine King of Yellow Spring. In the more than 10,000 years of human history, there were countless peerless powerhouses that were born. However, those that could be endlessly praised were only a few dozen people. These people were the most powerful existence in the Federation and even the entire universe. The Divine King. The Divine King of Yellow Spring was a great divine king in human history more than 4,000 years ago. Perhaps his strength wasn't the strongest, but his reputation was one of the most resounding. Even if the peak powerhouses of the other races heard this name, they would be incomparably terrified and shocked. That was because this name only represented one meaning: slaughter. Limitless slaughter. Legend had it that every time the Divine King of Yellow Spring killed a god, their soul and will would be suppressed and absorbed by the Yellow Spring Tombstone. In the end, they would turn into the appearance of those creatures before they died, forever remaining on the tombstone. And on the Yellow Spring Tombstone in front of them, thousands of images flashed. This could only mean one thing: the divine king of Yellow Spring had once killed thousands of gods. This was too terrifying. In that era, the divine king of Yellow Spring was also known as the divine king of slaughter. Legend had it that for the sake of the human race's overlord, he once killed countless people, causing countless peak races of that era to tremble and submit. Even the divine king of the other races of the same era deeply feared his existence. I didn't expect that the seal here was actually set up by him. No wonder it took so many geniuses to activate the power of their bloodlines to barely resist it. The divine king of Yellow Spring was an invincible powerhouse who stood at the peak of the divine king. His strength was one of the strongest among all the divine kings of all races since ancient times. Even after more than 4,000 years, he's still not someone below the divine king can provoke. If not for the fact that so many divine bloodlines were activated at the same time, I'm afraid we wouldn't even have the slightest chance of stopping it. While he was thinking, the Yellow Spring tombstone had already descended. Powerful, it was simply too powerful. Although it was only a part of the seal and only a trace of the power of the Yellow Spring tombstone, the divine king of Yellow Spring's martial Tao avatar, the extent of its power was indescribable. Compared to the giant hand formed by the ancient god earlier, this Yellow Spring tombstone's power was simply countless times greater. Even if it was only a trace of the power of the projection, it was enough to kill any god. With such a powerful force, perhaps even a level 2 life-sustaining planet would be instantly shattered. It's hard to imagine just how powerful the Divine King is. No wonder the legends that describe the Divine King say that they can shatter a super-sustaining planet with a wave of their arms. Just their strength alone is enough to contend with those black holes that are considered forbidden areas in the universe. Finally, the crushing power descended. At this moment, Lu Feng also followed the example of those people, fusing the power of their bloodlines into his virtual body and enveloping himself. They knew that if they relied on their strength, perhaps even more than 20 gods would not be able to withstand the Yellow Spring tombstone's phantom. They could only rely on the power of their bloodlines. The moment it covered his entire body, Lu Feng felt an indescribably terrifying pressure descend from the heavens. That formidable strength appeared from all angles, born from all possible time and space. It was as if it wanted to completely shatter him. Chapter 52. However, just as Lu Feng thought that his soul was about to shatter, a large part of the terrifying pressure on his body suddenly disappeared. Although it was still as terrifying and indescribable, it was still within Lu Feng's tolerance. He looked at the countless rays of light surrounding his body and immediately understood. The Yellow Springs Divine King was a divine king, but this Yellow Springs monument was ultimately only his martial Tao incarnation and could not be compared to his main body. Furthermore, what appeared here was only a small part of the Yellow Springs monument's shadow. Its power was probably not even 1/10,000th of its peak power. Those who could enter here were all gods' descendants. Their bloodline power came directly from their ancestors. Even if it could not compare to the Yellow Springs monument's shadow, it was enough to withstand. The pressure was still increasing. However, just as Lu Feng thought that it would never end, all the pressure suddenly disappeared. In the next moment, he realized that he had left the pitch-black space. Looking at the familiar surroundings, Lu Feng realized that he had returned to his main body. Everything he saw before had completely disappeared. Turning around, Lu Feng finally heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that the Guardians had stopped. He knew that the seal had been temporarily opened. "Thank you, Guardians, for your help." Young Master Luo looked at the Guardians who seemed to have just fought a great battle and expressed his gratitude. He turned around and faced a young existence beside him, and said again, "Young Master Su, take out that artifact. We've come this far, we can finally try." Hearing young Master Luo's words, that young Master Su nodded lightly and then took out a disc-like object from somewhere. It was plain and unremarkable. However, the patterns carved on it seemed to be telling of its extraordinariness and uniqueness. My family obtained this artifact from the ruins of an ancient civilization in a distant galaxy. After years of research, we discovered that it seems to be closely related to this sacrificial ground. My family's elders discovered that this artifact is very likely related to opening this sacrificial ground. Whether it's true or not, we can still give it a try. After all, once we really open this sacrificial ground, the things inside will definitely make our trip worthwhile. Hearing this, everyone gently nodded their heads. Indeed, there were a few other pinnacle beings besides the Divine King of Yellow Springs who had entered this place. And they were all universe supreme beings at the level of the Divine King. Things that the Divine King did not want didn't mean that they were useless. After all, in the eyes of the Divine King, there were very few things in this universe that could be used. Then, let's give it a try. After he finished speaking, all of them looked nervously at young Master Su, who was walking towards the Buddha's pagoda. This time, Lu Feng did the same. However, he was stunned by what he saw. Because at this moment, the Buddha's pagoda in his eyes had already changed completely. Everything he had seen before had disappeared. Those ancient mottled walls had become a thing of the past. Now, the part in his eyes was incomparably sparkling and translucent. It was a sparkling and translucent wall made of an unknown material. On this wall, there was something that looked like a door that was flickering with fluorescent light. And young Master Su was walking toward that door. Seeing Lu Feng's strange expression, young Master Luo smiled slightly. He walked to Lu Feng's side and said, "You must be wondering why this sacrificial ground has become like this. Actually, this is the true appearance of the sacrificial ground. Originally, its entire body was made of this sparkling and translucent light. But later, it was sealed by the Divine King of Yellow Springs and became what it is now." Lu Feng nodded lightly. "Actually, I've always been puzzled. Since there are gods in your family, why don't you ask them to open this sacrificial ground directly? I think that once this huge pagoda loses the seal of the Divine King of Yellow Springs, it shouldn't be a problem for one or a few gods to break the entrance." This was Lu Feng's question. In his opinion, the greatest reliance of this Futu pagoda was the seal of the Divine King of Yellow Springs outside. And once those powerhouses appeared and used the power of their bloodline to break the seal for a short period of time like today, would the power of the gods not be enough to open this sacrificial ground? Hearing Lu Feng's words, young Master Luo only smiled slightly. There was a kind of kindness in this smile. Originally, this was all top secret. Even in those families, only the core disciples were allowed to know about it. However, it doesn't matter if I tell you now. Speaking of this, young Master Luo glanced at Lu Feng again. However, the meaning contained in this gaze confused Lu Feng even more. "Do you still remember the problems you discovered when you first arrived here yesterday?" When he first arrived yesterday at the center of the spaceship, Lu Feng had been puzzled by the uniqueness of Gufang's star. It was also at that time that he first met young Master Luo. Of course, Lu Feng remembered everything. He nodded. Actually, in this sacrificial ground, the tens of thousands of pagodas around it aren't considered sacrificial grounds. They exist for the sake of this pagoda. The biggest function of those pagodas is to nurture. They are constantly nurturing a special kind of power that is integrated into this pagoda in the center. Actually, these patterns that you see are all formed after those pagodas were nurtured. They are imprinted on this largest pagoda through an inexplicable bond. Hearing this, Lu Feng revealed a look of shock. Through countless pagodas, these mysterious patterns were nurtured, and through a special method, these patterns were engraved on this pagoda. All of this was a little too inconceivable, however. What young Master Luo said next made Lu Feng completely dumbfounded. Gufang's star doesn't have any gravity. You've noticed this too. The super-life planets with normal gravity in the Federation also have gravity. In the entire Federation, only this place doesn't have any gravity at all. The reason for all of this is because Gufang's star isn't a real planet. Its real identity should be weapon. Lu Feng was stunned. He was completely dumbfounded. He looked at young Master Luo with disbelief in his eyes. Weapon? How could it be a weapon? The largest weapon that appeared on the Sky Network was only comparable to a city. As for that artifact, it had appeared a few eras ago. Power was terrifying, almost comparable to a weapon like a star fortress. However, young Master Luo said that this super-life planet that was 100,000 times the size of the Cymbidium was also a weapon. Was there such a huge weapon in this universe? Seeing Lu Feng's expression, young Master Luo smiled gently. When I first heard about this, I was also very surprised. However, this is the truth. But it's a pity that this artifact is too big and unimaginable. Even the Divine King didn't use its power. Therefore, in the end, it has always existed, but only as a secret, in the hearts of the top figures in the Federation. And this sacrificial ground is actually a part of this weapon. If you want to forcefully open this sacrificial ground, then you have to be the enemy of the entire old Orchid Star, and you have to collide with this terrifying and mysterious weapon. With that kind of power, I don't think anyone can do it. Lu Feng was silent. He was extremely silent. If what young Master Luo said was true, then perhaps no one could use violence to open this huge photopagoda in the center. Even a god, 100 or 1,000 gods, couldn't do it. Even the Divine King didn't have such power. Alright, success or failure, we'll see the results soon. Now let's wait and see. Young Master Luo didn't look at Lu Feng anymore. His eyes were slightly excited as he looked at young Master Su, who was trying his best to open the door. However, he didn't see the strange light in Lu Feng's eyes when he turned around. It still doesn't work. Everyone's face was filled with dejection. They had seen the result. Until the last moment, the door's pattern didn't change at all. It was still in its original state without any change. At this moment, although no one said anything, everyone could see the deep disappointment on their faces. After a deep sigh, young Master Luo slowly said, "It seems that we still failed this time. If you don't reach the Divine King's level, you can't enter this place." Everyone was extremely silent. The thing inside could definitely make countless people go crazy, but they were destined to have no fate with it. The Divine King is an overlord of an era, the strongest existence that can look down on billions of races in the universe. They stand in the infinite starry sky. They symbolize peerless invincibility. In the vast universe, there's nothing that can go against them. After becoming the Supreme Divine King, what else in the universe is worth their attention? Moreover, it's not that easy to reach that level of existence, one of the geniuses murmured to himself. His words were heard by everyone. They were also extremely silent. That's right. What kind of existence was the Divine King? How could they reach him just by thinking about it? Although everyone present was a genius, and some were even geniuses of the Federation level. However, no one was willing to believe that a Divine King could be born among them. Even the 7 sovereigns of the younger generation had almost no possibility of that happening. The 5 sovereigns of the previous generation were overflowing with talent, but they were all completely suppressed in the face of the provocation of the peerless geniuses of thousands of races. And the Godslayer is even more stunning. He's only 27 years old, but he's already reached the godly state, looking down on almost all the peerless geniuses of billions of races. But even so, he's just an existence that people hope to break the shackles of the Divine King. Can people like us be born? Chapter 53. In the end, everyone left. They knew that this trip had been in vain. Even so, they didn't feel too regretful. After all, they had already thought of the outcome before coming. Moreover, being able to see one of the 7 emperors, the Luo Emperor, unleash his full power made this trip worthwhile. He watched as the crowd gradually left. Lu Feng stood in the same spot without moving an inch. He quietly watched the Futu Pagoda reveal its true appearance. Beside him, Mr. Luo didn't leave either. He came to Lu Feng's side and looked at him with a strange expression. He slowly said, "Are you very unwilling to accept this?" After Lu Feng heard this, he didn't nod or shake his head. It was impossible to guess what he was thinking. Seeing this, young Master Luo chuckled and shook his head slightly. There are many such ruins in the universe. Although in terms of rarity, perhaps the Gufang Star Sacrificial Land should belong to the top ranks, since it's the top, it's not easy to obtain. This time, just take it as a chance to broaden your horizons. By the way, I still don't know your name. This time, Lu Feng didn't hide it. Although he didn't get anything out of it. However, it was all thanks to Mr. Luo that he was able to come here and experience so much. Lu Feng would naturally remember this person who was indebted to him. My name is Lu Feng. Mr. Luo's eyes flashed with a trace of excitement when he heard this. However, this trace of excitement was completely suppressed in an instant. He quietly looked at Lu Feng and suddenly laughed. Lu Feng, right? That's a very good name, a very good name. After saying this, Mr. Luo looked at Lu Feng and moved his mouth slightly, as if he wanted to say something. However, in the end, he didn't say anything. He just gently patted Lu Feng's shoulder again. Then, he took out something that looked like a crystal from his body and handed it to Lu Feng. This is my family's substitute crystal. If you encounter any danger that you can't resist, then crush it. The moment it shatters, it will produce a powerful force that will help you once. Moreover, once the experts of my family sense the shattering of the crystal, they will do their best to save you. Looking at the crystal in front of him, Lu Feng recovered from his thoughts for the first time. He looked at young Master Luo in front of him. He did not understand why young Master Luo would give this to him. You don't need to know the reason. One day you will understand. Alright. I have to leave too. I hope that the next time we meet, you will no longer be the same person. After saying this, young Master Luo turned around and left. Looking at Luo Gongzi's disappearing figure, a trace of confusion flashed across Lu Feng's eyes. Lu Feng was not an idiot. He naturally knew the weight of the crystals in his hand. The family's experts that young Master Luo mentioned were definitely real experts. After all, he was already at the peak of martial arts. Since he called them experts, those existences must be gods. Gods could tear the void apart with a wave of their hand. Once they moved forward at full speed, their speed would be 10 times or even 100 times faster than the fastest interstellar fast ships. And with this crystal, it was almost equivalent to having another life. Such a valuable item, it must have been given to young Master Luo because of his exceptional talent. But why would he give such a precious item to someone he had only met once? Lu Feng really could not understand. Young Master, that's a substitute crystal. You must know that there are only a few such crystals in the family. Every single one of them was refined by the clan's elders over a long period of time. I remember that you didn't give it to young Miss when she wanted it back then. But now, why are you? Young Master Luo reached out and interrupted Uncle Ping, who was about to say something. A trace of melancholy appeared on his face. Uncle Ping, let's not talk about this anymore. I didn't give it to Ah Zi back then because I was afraid that she would use it to venture into dangerous places. So, I didn't give it to her. But this person is different. After all, he is alone outside. If he really encounters danger, this thing can help him once. As for the reason, you don't have to ask anymore. There will be a day when you will understand. After saying this, young Master Luo walked into the distance. Uncle Ping stood in place and seemed to be thinking about something. But after a moment, he seemed to have thought of something. His expression changed slightly. Lu Feng, his surname is Lu, he actually has the surname Lu. Everyone had already left. In the entire ancient Futu pagoda, only Lu Feng was left. He stood quietly in front of the pagoda, his eyes flashing with a strange light. Finally, Lu Feng smiled. After an hour of observation, Lu Feng finally found something. This seal does indeed have an incomparably terrifying self-healing ability, as expected of a seal set by the Divine King. But after countless years and countless bombardments, the seal seems to have weakened a lot. An hour has passed. Although it has recovered a lot, it's a pity that the extent is not very great. At this rate, it will probably be impossible to restore it to its previous state in less than a day. A day should be enough. With a happy smile on his face, Lu Feng turned around and walked outside. Perhaps others did not know, but Lu Feng knew very well. He knew the reason why these people did not open this place of worship. In fact, to open this place of worship, they did not need anything at all. The fundamental reason why they could not open it was that they did not find the right intersection. The lines that looked like a door were never the real door. After the seal was restored, this ancient and huge pagoda of Futu would be restored to its former state. Except for the flickering light that was covered, all the other lines were like relief sculptures, presented in front of everyone. Of course, if one looked at it from the outside, this was indeed the only place that looked like the real door in the entire pagoda. But Lu Feng knew that this was not the real door at all. After all, in his own mind space, there was a real heavenly Futu. It was a heavenly stupa that was much more complete and vast than the one before. In the mind space, he did not know how long he had cultivated before condensing the primordial body and opening the god's domain. And it was the heavenly Futu that allowed him to obtain these opportunities. Lu Feng still remembered clearly that there were countless lines on the heavenly Futu, although he did not remember all of them. But he still vaguely remembered most of them. And Lu Feng naturally knew the lines that looked like the door. Back then, he had been puzzled about the meaning of these lines. Now, although the Futu pagoda in front of him had not been completely perfected, the location of the real door would not change. Therefore, other than the Divine King of the Underworld and the few Divine Kings who had really walked in here, everyone else had been deceived by these lines. It was not that they could not enter, but that they had never found the real door. Lu Feng was very likely to be the first human besides the Divine King to be able to walk in here. It's not suitable now. I'll come alone at night and give it a try. However, I have to thank these top geniuses of the Federation for helping me with this opportunity today. If they had not opened the seal, even if I knew where the real door was, it would have been useless. It was already afternoon when he left. Lu Feng did not waste any time and returned to the hotel to rest. Time passed slowly. When he came out again, it was already 10 o'clock at night. Feeling that the time was just right, Lu Feng finally came out of the hotel again and drove directly to the place of worship. This time, he did not waste any time. Starting from a place where he could not drive, Lu Feng ran as fast as he could toward the huge Futu pagoda in the center. Compared to the morning and noon, Lu Feng did not waste much time. When he came again, it took him less than 2 hours. Feeling the empty and dark world around him, Lu Feng smiled with satisfaction. In front of him, the place of worship was still blooming with a strange light that belonged to it. But this light was a little strange. In the dark night, such a dazzling light did not illuminate any place around it. That light could only be felt when you looked at it. This was really strange. But Lu Feng did not care much about this. What he really cared about was the thing in the pagoda. After all, that was a divine object that countless geniuses coveted. Looking at the seal that had recovered a little, Lu Feng took a deep breath and began to move along the huge pagoda. Finally, after walking for about 10 minutes, Lu Feng stopped, because he clearly remembered that this was the place where the main entrance to Futu was located. It's here. If I remember correctly, I should be able to enter from here. Taking a deep breath, Lu Feng stretched out his arm and began to condense the power of the bloodline. When it was done, he finally slowly put it on the pagoda. In an instant, everything changed. Everything was completely changed. Looking at everything that was strange yet familiar, Lu Feng was slightly sluggish. He didn't seem to believe that he was here. How could it be here? In front of him was an endless dark space. He was a little familiar with this place. After all, he had come in once during the day and afternoon. But it shouldn't be here. Isn't the seal already broken? Isn't the seal still not fully repaired? How could I be here? Lu Feng's face kept twisting. It was not that he was timid, but what he was about to face was too terrifying. That was a terrifying power that could only be resisted by the combined power of countless gods' descendants' bloodlines. The Divine King. Chapter 54. As long as it was related to the Divine King, which one of them was not an existence that could shock the heavens and the earth and make the galaxy tremble. Although the Netherworld Monument was only a projection of a trace of power, the reputation of the Netherworld Monument was too great. Among the few most terrifying martial arts incarnations that were passed down from ancient times, the Netherworld Monument was one of the best. Even those foreign races would tremble at the mention of this name. Lu Feng knew that the power of this seal was definitely at the level of a god. Even after countless years of weakening, it still had the power of a god. During the day, the terrifying giant hand gave Lu Feng too much of a shock. However, when the giant hand of the Gulen god fell, it had the power to easily crush a quasi-life-bearing planet. If the power of a god erupted at full force, perhaps even a second-class life-bearing planet would be completely crushed. Faced with such power, Lu Feng knew that he had no resistance at all. What should I do? What should I do? I remember that we left directly after the external power was released. Apart from this, there must be other ways to leave. There must be. But what should I do? At this moment, Lu Feng thought of the crystal that the mysterious child Luo gave him before they parted. However, this thought only flashed through his mind for a moment. After all, the crystal was still in his body. Even if he wanted to use it now, there was no way for him to do so. After all, he was now in a place similar to the mind space in the past. In a distant place, a penetrating light appeared. A huge object that covered the sky slowly appeared. At this moment, a feeling called despair appeared in Lu Feng's eyes. What was that? Even if it was weakened countless times, even if it was just a trace of the power of a projection, it would still make a god fear or even retreat. Faced with such a thing, there would be no resistance at all. Was he, Lu Feng, going to walk towards the end of the world? This is greed. If it wasn't because of greed, why would I have to face such a situation of certain death alone? A bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Looking at the terrifyingly huge Yellow Springs monument, Lu Feng understood his fate. That thing required dozens of bloodline powers to fuse together to resist it. As for himself, he didn't even have much bloodline power. Even if he did, it was sealed. What could he do in the face of such a projection of power that surpassed that of gods? Finally, the Yellow Springs monument came crashing down. Death, death. This was an absolute death situation. But it was this certain death situation that ignited Lu Feng's madness at the last moment. Lu Feng, he was the edge, the absolute edge. Similarly, he was also crazy, endlessly crazy. This was Lu Feng. Even if I die, I will fight. There are too many things that I'm worried about. I haven't fulfilled the promise I made, and I haven't found where my hope lies. I don't want to die. I cannot die. I don't want to die. Roaring towards the sky, Lu Feng's body instantly emitted a strange and resplendent light. It was also at this moment that a hazy brilliance appeared on Lu Feng's body in the outside world. His body in the outside world began to tremble involuntarily. Countless runes that could shake everything condensed and flickered, appearing continuously. They tore through the void as if they were descending from endless time and space. Vaguely, they seemed to be covering his body. In the mind space, the terrifying netherworld monument was about to arrive. Even though they were separated by such a long distance, Lu Feng felt like he was about to be completely crushed. He could feel that his soul was being squeezed by billions of tons of weight, and there was a possibility that it would shatter at any time. Countless formidable strengths began to crazily devour every corner of his soul from all angles. But those inexplicably appearing runes, those endless resplendent lights, gave Lu Feng a formidable strength that allowed him to resist anything. Finally, Lu Feng felt that his end had come. However, just as he was about to despair in this endless sealed space, he felt a powerful force coming from his body in the outside world. It was a kind of profound mystery, a kind of indescribable power covering it. Everything was sent from his body, which was filled with all kinds of power, to his soul. It made his soul stronger, stronger, and stronger. In his eyes, there was a brilliant divine light that penetrated everything. In just an instant, the powerful pressure disappeared completely. At this moment, Lu Feng stood in front of the netherworld monument that seemed to be able to shatter stars. He watched it come closer and closer, but there was no longer any sense of fear. I understand now. I finally understand Father's words. So, everything is actually like this. So, my bloodline is really incomparably noble. It has finally appeared. It is finally going to boil. Come, come. Let me see what kind of heaven-defying existence Lu Feng's bloodline, the noble bloodline that my father spoke of, is. Young master, what are you waiting for? Uncle Ping looked a little anxious. He looked at young Master Luo, who had been calm all this while, and was about to make a move. However, the moment he wanted to move forward, he was stopped by an arm. Young master, what are you? Young Master Luo shook his head gently. He looked into the distance, at Lu Feng, who was under the endless brilliance, with a strange light in his eyes. The atmosphere was slightly strange and incomparably oppressive. However, in the end, young Master Luo said nothing and shook his head gently. Seeing this scene, Uncle Ping was completely anxious. Young master, don't hesitate. If you don't make a move, he will really die. What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? Death was death. In the face of such danger, if they still did not make a move, Lu Feng's ending would be death. Uncle Ping kept talking in his ear, but young Master Luo shook his head gently in the end. His eyes were unusually resolute, and he did not allow anyone to go against him. Finally, Uncle Ping seemed to have made up his mind. He actually defied young Master Luo's will and wanted to make a move first. However, an arm appeared in front of Uncle Ping. It was an incomparably strong and unshakable arm. Young master, if you did not use King's Descent during the day, I really would not be your match. However, you have already made a move, so you can't stop me now. A trace of anger flashed across Uncle Ping's eyes. He looked at Lu Feng, whose body was gradually collapsing, and finally shook off young Master Luo's arm. Young Master Luo sighed deeply as he looked at the anxious Uncle Ping in front of him. I know, Uncle Ping. After all, he saved your life. Now that his descendant is in danger, you will definitely not stand by and do nothing. However, did you not think? Think of what? Uncle Ping was slightly taken aback. He did not know what young Master Luo was thinking about. He sighed deeply again. At this moment, young Master Luo's eyes were filled with anticipation and a strange radiance. Don't you know his strength? His strength, in an instant, Uncle Ping finally thought of something. At this moment, a dazzling radiance appeared in his eyes. That's right. This time, I was too rash. Master's existence has already become a legend. Back then, that master gave up everything for this child and chose to break off relations with his family. And for such a precious child, how could he not do anything to protect him? Young Master Luo finally smiled as he looked at Uncle Ping, who had finally regained his composure. This time, he stopped Uncle Ping from saving him. Apart from his existence, he also wanted to take a gamble. He wanted to take a gamble for his family. When he left home, he had already entered the realm of a true god. How could such a powerful person allow his descendant to leave just like that? You have to know that his existence is a legend revered by millions. In a faraway place, Lu Feng's body seemed to be in its final moments. At this moment, a trace of anxiety flashed across young Master Luo's eyes. Uncle Ping, who was beside him, had wanted to intervene several times but was stopped by young Master Luo in the end. Young Master Luo's arm trembled slightly as he looked at Lu Feng, who seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. The corners of his mouth trembled slightly, but Uncle Ping beside him did not hear anything. Could it be that I was wrong? But you have to go through this once. Back then we sacrificed too much for you. Now we finally see hope. You have to succeed. In the sealed space, Lu Feng's body had already started to fade away. His eyes were dim and lifeless. However, in the colorlessness, there were still two types of light that made everything tremble. One was called the unparalleled sharpness. The other was called endless madness. Unknowingly, the infinitely huge tombstone had already descended from the sky and steadily pressed down on Lu Feng's body. Under normal circumstances, if it had been anyone else, even a god, their soul would have been completely crushed by the terrifying tombstone. However, at this moment, Lu Feng was only an illusion. He had not completely disappeared. Although he was already on the verge of death, Lu Feng could still clearly feel every change in his body and soul, much more clearly than ever before. When the Yellow Springs tombstone's illusion descended, Lu Feng once again felt that he was about to die. However, at that moment, he seemed to have seen the existence of a shackle. Faintly, cracks began to appear on the shackles. At the moment of life and death, countless rays of golden light filled with the essence of truth surged into the cracks. The appearance of these rays of light actually allowed him to resist the violent power. After that, every time the Yellow Springs tombstone was about to crush him, the rays of light would appear and inject new power into him, preventing him from completely dying. Chapter 55. Now it was another dangerous moment, and it was the most dangerous moment, because the Acheron monument seemed to be enraged. At this moment, it actually manifested its entire body and gathered in the supreme dark void. It wanted to use its strongest power to completely pulverize Lu Feng. If it were not for his powerful bloodline power, his soul would have been shattered into pieces long ago. But now, through the shackles of the seal, the bloodline power was gradually unable to provide enough power. This unparalleled majesty caused Lu Feng's will to become blurry. Even his thoughts were fading. Looking at the descending invincible monument for the last time, Lu Feng finally gained a moment of clarity. In those sharp and crazy eyes, there was actually the most arrogant belief surging at the same time. Come on! Come on! What life and death, what fate! I, Lu Feng, have never been afraid of anything. Anything. Don't even think about controlling my fate. The Yellow Spring Steel's infinitely large body finally descended slowly once again. Make your move. At this moment, young Master Luo had already given up. He finally gave up on his previous plan. After all, once Lu Feng died, everything would be irreversible. In the next instant, a dazzling light appeared on young Master Luo's body. That was a strong and invincible power that covered the heavens, dazzling and invincible. At this moment, young Master Luo was truly using all his power. Although it was not as strong as when he used the Supreme Guardian King's descent during the day, it was not much weaker now. Young Master Luo also made his move. Uncle Ping finally stopped suppressing. Similarly, he ignited his peak power. He was a perfect stage martial artist, like young Master Luo. He was even a peak existence, almost a deity who was about to become a god. His move also shook the heavens and earth. The infinite light burned to the extreme. At this moment, young Master Luo seemed to have become the light source of everything. At this moment, it was so similar to the day. He actually used that terrifying and heaven-defying Supreme Guardian King's descent once again. In an instant, the two of them actually crossed the infinite distance and appeared directly in front of Lu Feng. They mustered all their strength and struck the ancient Futu pagoda with shocking power. Boom! A loud sound could be heard. Young Master Luo relied on his invincible attack to defeat gods. Although he was no longer as powerful as he was during the day, he was still extremely terrifying. With such a joint attack, everything within a radius of 100,000 miles would be sunk, turning into endless ruins. Endless smoke and dust appeared, filling the entire space. But the enormous Buddha's pagoda didn't even shake in the slightest, and it was even to the extent that everything in its surroundings didn't change in the slightest. In the next moment, two figures shot out from the endless smoke and dust. They flew backwards all the way, smashing through hundreds and thousands of ordinary pagodas. This was a technique in the blink of an eye, and they flew more than 100 miles away. Young Master Luo struggled to crawl up from the ground. At this moment, his face was filled with despair and horror. How is this possible? That's impossible. Isn't it only possible to trigger that kind of power when the power of a god attacks the seal? Why? Why is Lu Feng, who isn't even a martial artist, able to trigger his will? The Divine King of the Netherworld. That's the will of the Divine King of the Netherworld. In the smoke and dust, no one could see, no one could understand, and no one was willing to believe. Because the scene in front of them was too horrifying, too shocking. At this moment, Lu Feng's entire body was covered in endless blood. His appearance was extremely miserable. However, what was truly shocking was not this. It was the huge image that appeared in the endless smoke and dust above Lu Feng. It was an ancient tombstone that flickered with countless runes. It was the most powerful tombstone that suppressed an era, causing the entire universe to tremble. It actually manifested at this moment. The terrifying tombstone began to descend, as if it wanted to completely slaughter Lu Feng, to completely crush Lu Feng. This was a kind of indescribable power, the most powerful force that shook the entire space-time. However, the dazzling radiance above Lu Feng's body also put him in an indescribable state, making Lu Feng invincible. Even in the face of such a huge tombstone, he didn't seem to be at a disadvantage. In the mind space, Lu Feng stared blankly at the towering giant in front of him. He no longer felt any pressure. However, he understood that he was facing an even more dangerous and inexplicable situation, because at this moment, he was facing a giant, an invincible supreme that stood on the tombstone overlooking countless living beings. The Netherworld, the Divine King of the Netherworld. At this moment, the giant that appeared in front of Lu Feng was actually a ruler. It was the most invincible existence that had dominated billions of years, the Divine King of the Netherworld. He had actually appeared, after being stunned for a moment. The Divine King of the Netherworld gently waved his arm. That power was too powerful, too unimaginable, and there was no way to deal with it. Lu Feng could sense that the appearance of this power was actually several times more terrifying than the full blow of the Netherworld tombstone. This was simply inexplicable. Seeing that this final blow was about to kill him, Lu Feng finally lost all reason and started to go completely crazy. Bloodline boil. I know that your existence is also unyielding, the greatest invincible. Boil. Bloom in my body, let this invincible bloodline revive in my body and break through the obstacles of heaven and earth once more. Bloodline. Lu Feng knew that the reason he was safe and sound was all because of that invincible bloodline. His bloodline had never been weak, it had never been thin. It was just that it was sealed. However, in this moment of crisis, it still forcefully passed through all obstacles and delivered the strongest power to him again and again. It allowed him to find a sliver of hope in this crisis, allowing him to break through the obstacles of heaven and earth and reach the peak. And now, this was a confrontation of the extremes. This was the descent of the Divine King's Majesty. This was his representative. In the face of this, Lu Feng did not tremble in the slightest. He was not afraid at all. All he had was a kind of madness, a kind of sharpness. The giant arm fell. That blow seemed to be the embodiment of the Divine King of the Netherworld's peerless will. He wanted to use his own power to destroy all existences that dared to challenge him. This was a kind of peerless and invincible stance. This was a peerless sharpness that belonged to the previous era, that overlooked the entire universe, that made billions of races submit, that made the existence of the Divine King fear and unable to retreat. Kill. The most terrifying vision had already appeared in Lu Feng's eyes. At this moment, he heard it. He finally heard the sound of the shackles in his body shattering. He finally saw the endless golden light flowing out of the seal. The shackles had shattered. King, that is the majesty of the king. That is the will of the king. He succeeded. He really succeeded. At the final moment of despair, at the moment of withering, young Master Luo's eyes were lifeless. In the next moment, his eyes flashed with disbelief and a kind of crazy excitement. Although he had used a peerless technique, although his body was seriously injured, young Master Luo could no longer care about anything else. He struggled to stand up from the ground and looked into the distance. The golden aura that broke through the obstacles of heaven and earth, the majestic aura that shook the entire era, and the endless dusk, could no longer control himself and suppress the madness in his heart. Beside him, Uncle Ping was in a daze. He did not feel anything, only a kind of complete sluggishness. The corners of his mouth were trembling as he muttered, amidst the endless smoke and dust, a person was still a person. However, he was no longer a person. At the moment, the endless golden light had completely submerged Lu Feng. It had completely soaked Lu Feng. Countless unimaginable power runes appeared and descended from time and space. They started to transform Lu Feng's body continuously, causing his physical body to undergo a complete transformation that shook everything. Bloodline awakening. I made the right bet. His bloodline has finally awakened completely under the majesty of the Divine King. This is the densest bloodline of the king since ancient times. He has finally broken through the restrictions of the bloodline shackles and arrived in this era. Tremble, Milky Way. Tremble endlessly, all the billions of races in the universe. The invincible majesty of the Lu family and the most glorious era of humankind are about to arrive. The bloodline of the greatest king has been completely awakened. In an instant, several extremely ancient existences suddenly opened their eyes. They looked in the same direction in horror and were filled with complicated expressions. The bloodline shackles have been shattered. A primordial divine descendant has finally broken through the obstacles and transformed into an azure dragon. He's about to leave the abyss of the azure parasol. What kind of bloodline is this? Why is it so powerful? It even makes me feel like I'm trembling. I wonder which divine descendant of the Divine King has such a terrifying majesty. This era is about to be turbulent again. Several extremely terrifying divine consciousnesses appeared and traversed through space and time. Any time and space restrictions were nothing in their eyes. This was the most powerful belief and soul. It made all living beings tremble and hesitate. However, just as they wanted to see which bloodline belonged to, an equally powerful majesty appeared and blocked countless divine consciousnesses, making it difficult for them to see the real situation. Bastard, who dares to disturb us? Investigate. Let the people of the family take action. We must find out which bloodline has appeared. Investigate this thoroughly. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.